The high plains of the Osage Flats were a skillet sizzling under a silver dollar sun. The heat did not just press down, it leached the color from the sky, leaving a bleached, merciless white that hurt the eyes. Through this shimmering emptiness rode Rowena Vale, a woman barely into her 20s, though the grit lining her eyelashes and the set of her jaw made her look older. She tasted dust on her tongue and the metallic tang of a fear she refused to name. Her horse, a long-legged bay, was dark with sweat but moved with a steady, ground-eating gait. It knew this was not a ride for pleasure. Its hooves made a dry, brittle sound, a crackle and a snap against the burnt, yellow grass. In the oppressive silence of the flats, every sound was an intrusion, a potential betrayal. Rowena was bound to the object strapped to her saddle horn. It was not large, but its weight was absolute, a physical anchor pulling her toward an unknown fate. It was a heavy lockbox forged in Missouri, its corners bruised from hard travel. A dull gray seal of lead, pressed flat and hard, covered the keyhole. Stamped into the lead, faint and overlapping, were 3 initials, J.P.W. She had not spoken the name aloud in weeks. Judge Pembroke Whitcomb, her mentor, her protector, the man who had seen a mind worth training behind her quiet demeanor. The box was his last directive, her inheritance and her curse. It was the only proof she had left of a world that had vanished in smoke and whispers. She had been riding for 3 days without a proper stop, sleeping in dry arroyos and eating cold tack, pushing west with a desperation that overruled exhaustion. Missouri was a lifetime ago. St. Louis was a bonfire of memory, all ash and the smell of sulfur. She had watched the civilized world, the world of ledgers, law, and supposed order burn down around her. Now, there was only this, the unforgiving flats, the blinding sun, and the dense, terrible weight of the box. Copper Lantern Ridge did not appear on the horizon as much as it festered. It rose from the dust like a scab, a collection of raw timber and false-fronted buildings huddled against the relentless wind. The town smelled of stale whiskey, unwashed bodies, and the sharp, acidic tang of the nearby copper tailings that gave the settlement its name. Rowena pulled her horse to a stop at the edge of the main thoroughfare. The wind, which had been her only howling companion on the flats, now seemed hostile, personal. It whipped the hem of her linen duster and snagged the saloon sign across the street, making its hinges scream, a single high-pitched keen, over and over, like a tortured animal. The town was watching. She felt the eyes before she saw them. Men in battered hats paused their spit and whittle on the boardwalk. A woman in a faded calico apron froze while shaking a rug from an upstairs window of the Mercantile. They were not just looking at her, a woman traveling alone, which was a curiosity in itself. They were looking at the box. In this part of the territory, a woman alone was a problem to be solved, or a meal to be eaten. A woman alone carrying a sealed lockbox from back east was a provocation. The rumor had traveled faster than her horse. It had come down the wire, clicking and chattering from junction to junction. A snake slithering ahead of her, Silas Marquand, the railroad baron whose steel tracks were strangling the territory one land grant at a time, wanted his property back. He had not named the property in his public bulletins, but he had named the price. A big reward. How big enough to make an honest man check his morals at the door? Big enough to make a desperate man pull a trigger for a stranger. $500. Some said 1,000. Others whispered, enough gold to buy a man's soul, or to end a woman's life before she could even state her business. Rowena felt the weight of that reward like a rope tightening around her neck. Every glance from the boardwalk felt like a measurement for the noose. She ignored the saloon, the hotel, and the inquisitive stare of the sheriff lounging in a chair outside the jail. She guided her horse to the one building that offered the promise of repair, the one trade that lived in iron and fire, not whispers. The blacksmith shop. It sat at the edge of town, its wide mouth open and dark, breathing plumes of heat into the already sweltering air. The rhythmic, heavy clang of a hammer on an anvil was the town's only steady heartbeat. He was framed in the doorway, a silhouette against the roaring orange hell of the forge. Jonah Pike. He did not look up when her horse's shadow fell across his dusty floor. He was finishing a weld, his movements economical, powerful, precise. He was not a big man, not a thick-necked brawler, but built of dense muscle and coiled sinew, like the tempered iron he worked. His sleeves were rolled, revealing forearms slick with sweat and black with soot. This was Jonah Pike, the Tho-Ren, the former army scout who, the rumors said, knew every dry wash and hidden pass within 100 miles. He finished his task, plunging the glowing metal into the slack tub. The water exploded in a violent, angry hiss. The sudden silence that followed was deafening. Only then did he turn. His eyes, the color of gunmetal gray, took her in. He did not look at her face, nor her figure. His gaze went straight to her hands, noting the white knuckles, and then to the lockbox she was unstrapping from the saddle horn. Rowena slid from the saddle, her legs trembling from 3 days of riding. She forced herself to walk steadily into the heat. "I need this fixed," she said. Her voice was a dry rasp, cracking on the last word. She placed a small, elegant brass key on the anvil. It was bent near the shaft, its teeth skewed and useless. Jonah Pike looked from the key to her face. Their eyes met. It was not a spark. It was the scrape of flint on cold steel. He saw the desperation she was trying to mask, the sheer, bone-deep exhaustion that was the only thing holding her upright. He saw a woman who had run out of road. She saw a man who had seen too much and wanted, profoundly, to see no more. He was walled off, shut down, his face a mask of iron and soot. Then he reached for the key. As his hand moved from the shadow of his torso into the slanted light from the doorway, his sleeve, damp with sweat, slid back an inch. On the inside of his wrist, pale and stark against the grime-stained skin, was a scar. It was not a jagged line from a knife, but a deliberate, puckered mark, a brand, a perfectly formed letter V. Rowena's breath hitched. It was not a gasp, not a skip. It was a full, painful stop, a lurch in her chest that sent ice water through her veins. She knew that mark. She had seen it sketched in Judge Whitcomb's most private ledger, next to a list of names under the heading Marrow Creek Victims. This man, this blacksmith, was not just a stranger. He was not a solution. He was part of the story. He was part of her story. Jonah saw the change in her. He saw her eyes flicker from his scar back to his face. The fear was still there, but the simple weariness was gone, replaced by something sharper, more intelligent, and infinitely more dangerous recognition. He tensed, his hand stopping inches from the key. That was when the shadows in the street shifted. Rowena had felt the eyes, but Jonah saw the men. 3 of them. They were not locals. Locals did not wear new denim dusters or carry matched sidearms with polished walnut grips. They did not stand in a perfect triangulation pattern, a textbook military crossfire, covering the street, the alley, and the front door of his shop. Rowena saw them, too, not by turning, but by watching his eyes. She saw the men reflected in a sheet of polished copper hanging by the door. One man leaned against the watering trough, trying to look casual, but his hand was too close to his holster. Another, a heavier man, checked his pocket watch. A clear signal. The third was just a shape in the alley's mouth, blocking the only other obvious exit. They were not waiting for her to make a mistake. They were waiting on her. They had tracked her, all this way from Missouri. The telegraph had done its work. Silas Marquand's men. The sound of the forge, the wind, the distant, tinny piano from the saloon, it all faded. The world shrank to the interior of this hot, dark smithy, smelling of coal smoke and horse sweat. Rowena turned her back to the door, a deliberate act that was either profound trust or absolute desperation. She looked at Jonah Pike, at the scar that branded him as a victim of the same men who hunted her. "Don't open the box," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the sudden, ringing quiet of the smithy, it was as loud as a confession. It was not a request. It was an order, a plea, and a warning, all tangled into one. Jonah Pike held her gaze. He had not moved. He understood the lethal geometry of the men outside. He understood the bent key. He understood the meaning of his own scar. He looked at the lead seal on the box she clutched to her chest, at the initials JPW. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes settled, hardened. "Not until you're ready," he replied. His voice was a low rumble, like rocks shifting deep underground. It was an acceptance, a contract. The decision was made, and the world outside, hearing their silence, knew it. Whump crack! The sound was not the sharp report of a pistol. It was the heavy-throated, chest-thumping roar of a buffalo rifle. A splinter of wood, 6 inches long, exploded from the thick door jamb, precisely where Rowena's head had been moments before. It spun through the dusty, superheated air and clattered onto the anvil, coming to rest between the bent key and the lockbox. It was a greeting, a message. "We see you. We do not care who is watching. Your time is up." Jonah Pike did not flinch. He did not shout or dive for cover. He moved like a striking animal. In one fluid, powerful motion, he grabbed the massive, two-handled leather bellows from its cradle and swung it toward the forge. He pumped it once. Whoosh! The blast of air sent a geyser of hot coals, white ash, and glowing embers into the air, momentarily blinding the orange eye of the fire. He had killed his light. The smithy was plunged into a dim, red-lit darkness, the only illumination coming from the bright, burning rectangle of the front doorway, a perfect target. "Stay away from the light," Jonah commanded, his voice all gravel. He grabbed her arm. His grip was not gentle. It was an iron clamp, burning through her sleeve. He did not pull her toward the street. He pulled her deeper into the shop, into the shadows. Away from the back door he knew was already watched. He pointed not at a door, but at a section of the wall where loose boards were hidden behind a stack of heavy wagon wheels. "The alley is watched," he said, his voice low. "The street is death. We take the low path." Rowena seized the lockbox, her knuckles white. Jonah grabbed his heavy hammer from the anvil. The first chase, the first desperate run, had begun. They were no longer two strangers meeting over a broken key. They were a conspiracy, bound by a scar and a bullet. That splinter of wood, still vibrating from the impact, was a key. It unlocked the part of her mind she kept sealed tighter than the lockbox. The past did not return in a gentle wave. It crashed over her, a torrent of kerosene-laced memories, sharp as broken glass. 3 months ago, Rowena Vale was not a fugitive. She was a clerk, a woman of ledgers and immaculate columns, at the First Chartered Bank of Whitcomb and Young in St. Louis, Missouri. She had been Judge Pembroke Whitcomb's protege. He, a partner in the bank and a sitting federal magistrate, had found her in a city orphanage, a quiet girl of 16 with a mind that cut through numbers like a diamond. He had financed her education at the finest women's academy, not in deportment, but in accounting and law. He gave her a desk, a stack of ledgers bound in green leather, and his complete trust. "Figures do not lie, Rowena," he was fond of saying, his waistcoat straining over a proud chest. "They are the bones of the truth." She was good at her work. She was precise. She balanced the books of shipping magnates and cattle barons down to the halfpenny. She loved the clean, crisp snap of a new ledger page, the smell of ink and old money, the absolute, unimpeachable logic of a balanced account. The lie began in April. It was not a glaring error. It was a subtle, cancerous growth. A new account, opened by a junior partner, for railroad logistics and surveying. The payments were large, regular. and disguised as disbursements for surveying equipment, payroll for grading crews, and land acquisition fees. But the corresponding invoices were thin, lacking the usual manifests and detailed receipts. They were just simple, signed chits. Rowena, with her eye for the flaw in the weave, noticed the tremor in the junior partner's signature. She cross-referenced the disbursements with a copy of the railroad's public charter. The payments were going west, but the approved railroad charter ran north. Curious. She pulled the reserve ledgers, the ones kept in the vault, the ones Judge Whitcomb himself managed, and there, hidden beneath a dozen legitimate accounts, she found it, the shadow ledger. It was not for logistics. It was a simple, brutal slush fund. The payments were not for equipment. They were retainers, weekly payments, disguised as security services, to a list of names. Some were Pinkerton agents, but others were names she had heard in hushed tones, men known as regulators and enforcers. The money trail was a black, creeping stain, funding a private army that moved ahead of the railroad, clearing the land not with contracts, but with intimidation, fire, and fear. She found the payments for Marrow Creek. It was a valley, 100 miles inside the territory, that the railroad was forbidden to touch by federal treaty, but Marquand's surveyors had found a way through. The slush fund ledger showed massive, single-sum payments to shell companies that had, just weeks before, purchased the valley from homesteaders. But Rowena knew those homesteaders. Their names were on the other side of Judge Whitcomb's personal advocacy files, families he was helping to fight foreclosure. They had not sold. They had been pushed out. She took the ledgers to him on a Tuesday night, the rain lashing against the thick glass of his library. The judge, usually a pillar of judicial granite, looked old. He looked terrified. He did not dismiss her. He put a trembling hand on her shoulder. "You've done well, child," he said, his voice a dry husk. "Too well." He explained. Silas Marquand, a man he had once called a friend, was moving too fast, too hard. He was buying politicians, judges, and agencies. The Pinkertons, once the bastion of private law, were now his personal collection agency. Whitcomb had been trying to build a case from the inside, quietly, using his position to gather evidence. He went to his safe and pulled out the lockbox. "This," he said, "is my insurance. Marquand knows about this box. He does not know what is in it, but he fears it. It contains the original fraudulent land titles for Marrow Creek, signed by the men he paid to forge them. It contains affidavits, my correspondence, my confession, if you will, of how close I let him get." He handed her the box. Its weight was shocking. "I am being watched. Rowena, my partners, young. I fear he has already turned. The bank is no longer safe." "Then we go to the marshals," she said. "Which ones?" he replied, a terrible, hollow sound in his throat. "Marquand's payroll is long. This is not about the law anymore. It is about the proof." He gave her the bent brass key. "This key is a decoy. It doesn't work. The box is sealed with my own press. Do not, under any circumstances, break that seal. It must be opened by a federal authority. Someone clean. Take this. Take it as far west as you can. To Sparrow's Bluff. Find a woman named Marta Quinn. She is the postmistress and, God willing, the last honest public official in the territory. Give it to her. And only her. You are not coming with me." His face hardened, the old judge returning for a moment. "A captain does not abandon a sinking ship. I will stay. I will create the diversion. I will make them look at me. Now go, Rowena. Go out the back. Do not go to your rooms. Do not pack a bag. Just ride." He vanished 2 days later. "Called away on urgent business," a sneering junior partner told her, his eyes dead. Then the true purge began. The informant list, the names of the homesteaders who had trusted Judge Whitcomb, was leaked. Rowena saw the Pinkerton manifest. It was a hunting party. That night, the archival warehouse where Whitcomb stored his private files, the ones not in the box, went up in flames. Rowena watched from a dark alley across the river, the acrid smoke stinging her eyes, the orange flames reflecting in the cold, muddy water of the Mississippi. It was the smell of evidence dying. She knew they would come for her next. She was the only one left who knew what the ledgers meant. She was right. The next morning, a warrant was posted, not for her testimony, but for her arrest. They did not accuse her of witnessing a crime. They accused her of committing one. The bank posted a notice. Miss Rowena Vale, a trusted clerk, had absconded with nearly $5,000 of bank funds, and to make the betrayal more personal, more salacious, they had produced a letter, a forged, faked, humiliating letter, supposedly from Rowena to the junior partner, detailing a passionate, one-sided love affair. It painted her as a woman scorned, a hysterical creature who had stolen the money in a fit of romantic vengeance. They had not just tried to kill her, they had tried to kill her name. They had turned her mind, her meticulous, careful, honest mind, into a weapon against her. She fled St. Louis that night with only the box, a good horse, and the clothes on her back. Before she left, she slipped one final note under the bank's front door, addressed to the men who had destroyed her life. "When justice sleeps, I will wake it." That was 3 months ago. 3 months of looking over her shoulder, of cold camps and hot fear. Now, in the smithy, the smell of gunpowder and hot, splintered pine brought it all flooding back. The bullet in the wall was not just a warning. It was a continuation. It was Silas Marquand, reaching across 1,000 miles of prairie to finish the job. Jonah Pike moved with a startling, dangerous grace. He did not go for the splinter. He went to the ground in front of it and, with the precision of a surgeon, plucked the spent casing from the floorboards where it had rolled. It was a big, heavy brass casing, .50 caliber. He held it up, not to the light, but to his nose. He sniffed the rim, his eyes narrowing. He rolled it between his thumb and forefinger, the metal still warm. "Marquand," Rowena said, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. She saw the logo stamped on the casing's base, a stylized M intertwined with a railroad spike. He was so arrogant he put his name on the very bullets that killed for him. "Clay Rook," Jonah said, his voice a low, flat statement. He tossed the casing onto the anvil. It rang, a single, sharp ping against the steel. "You know him." "I know his work." Jonah's gaze went past her, to the bright, threatening rectangle of the door. "He served in Cimarron, not a soldier, a special scout. He does not just track. He does not just kill. He cleans up. He's the man a man like Marquand sends when he wants a problem and everyone connected to it to disappear. He's the man you send to burn the village and salt the earth." He looked back at her, his gray eyes unreadable. "He's not here for a discussion. He's not here to negotiate. He's here to take that box." He nodded at the object clutched in her arms, her knuckles white. "If they want that box," Jonah Pike said, his voice dropping to a rumble, "and they know it's here, they will burn this whole town to the ground to get it." Rowena looked down at the JPW, etched on the lid. The lead seal that was her last connection to a life of honor and her only hope for justice. The fear that had lived in her belly for months did not vanish. It crystallized. It turned from a cold, running liquid into a hard, sharp stone. She raised her chin, her eyes meeting his. She was no longer a clerk. She was no longer a victim. She was a witness. And she was done running. She tightened her grip on the handle. Her eyes, which had been wide with the terror of the past, now narrowed, focusing on the present. They were as hard and as cold as the steel on his anvil. Jonah did not use the door. He slammed his heavy boot into the rotted boards he had pointed at, the wood exploding outward in a shower of dry rot and termite dust. He grabbed her arm, his grip an iron manacle, and hauled her through the opening into the blinding sunlight and choking dust of the alley. "The horses! Now!" he roared. Gunfire erupted from the front of the smithy, the heavy, booming cracks of rifles, answered by the higher, sharper pop-pop-pop of pistols from the men in the street. They were shooting at shadows, at the memory of where Rowena and Jonah had been. Jonah's horse and her own were hitched to a rail behind the shop. He did not bother with the reins. He vaulted into his saddle in a single, fluid motion. A man who was more at home on horseback than on his own feet. Rowena, burdened by the heavy lockbox, was slower. She jammed her boot into the stirrup, threw her leg over, and had to grab the saddle horn to pull herself up, the box slamming painfully against her ribs. "This way, Kestrel," Jonah shouted, already spurring his horse not toward the open plains, but toward the jagged, red rock wound in the earth that cut behind the town Kestrel Canyon. Rowena kicked her bay, the animal leaping into a desperate gallop. They tore past the back of the mercantile, past the tannery with its horrifying smell of chemicals and hide, and burst onto the game trail that led into the canyon. A bullet sang past her ear, a high-pitched, angry wasp, close enough for her to feel the heat of its passage. She did not look back. She hunched low over the horse's neck, one arm hooked around the lockbox, the other clutching the reins, her knuckles white and raw. They plunged into the canyon. The world changed instantly. The oppressive, wide-open sky of the Osage Flats was gone, replaced by towering, sheer walls of sandstone, 100 shades of red and orange. The silence was gone. Too, the sound of their horses' hooves, a frantic, desperate clatter on the rocky trail, was thrown back at them by the walls, magnified and multiplied. It was not just 4 hooves, or 8, it was 1,000. It was the sound of a phantom army, a cavalry charge thundering in their ears from every direction. It was the sound of war drums, just as the rumor said, and Rowena's heart hammered in time with the chaotic, terrifying rhythm. Jonah rode ahead, his body low and perfectly balanced, his head turning, listening, reading the echoes. He was not just fleeing, he was navigating. He led her on a path that was barely a path, a narrow ledge that crumbled at the edges, a steep drop to a dry, rock-strewn riverbed 50 feet below. Behind them, the sound of the pursuit entered the canyon. Their echoes were different. More voices, more horses. The metallic shing of a spur on rock. They were close. "They know this place," Rowena shouted over the din, her voice swallowed by the stone. "He knows it," Jonah yelled back, not turning. "Rook scouted this whole territory for Marquand. He knows the trails." "Then where are we going?" "Where the trail ends." Jonah spurred his horse, forcing it into a dangerous, jarring run. The canyon narrowed. The walls seemed to lean in, the strip of blue sky above them shrinking to a mere ribbon. The air grew hotter, the red dust thicker, coating her throat, her eyes, her very skin. And then the smoke. It did not rise from a campfire. It poured down from the canyon rim above them, thick and acrid, in 2 distinct, greasy plumes, one from the right wall, one from the left. Rowena choked, her horse snorting and shying. The smoke smelled of sulfur and chemicals, not wood. It stung her eyes, blurring the already treacherous path. "Flares!" Jonah bellowed, his voice tight with a new, cold anger. He reined in his horse, raising his hand to stop her. "It's a trap." Rowena pulled her bay to a skidding, rearing stop, the horse screaming in terror. The 2 plumes of smoke were drifting down, merging in the narrow bottleneck of the canyon, creating a perfect, choking curtain. "What is it?" she coughed, wiping at her streaming eyes. "A pincer, a U-shaped block. Rook's put men on both rims. The smoke is to screen us, to push us. He'll have a 3rd man waiting just ahead, where the canyon bottlenecks. He's bottling us. He's corralling us like cattle." As if summoned by his words, a new sound joined the symphony of echoes, a high, thin whistle. From the rim above, a man's voice, amplified by the rock, called out, "Pike, Jonah Pike, You know the game is over. Throw down the box, and Marquand might let the girl live." It was Clay Rook. His voice was calm, almost pleasant, like a man discussing the weather. "He's lying," Rowena screamed, her voice cracking with panic. "Of course he is," Jonah said, his own voice a low growl. He was scanning the walls, his eyes darting, not in fear but in calculation. He pointed ahead, through a gap in the swirling, acrid smoke. "The bridge." Rowena squinted. Through the gray-yellow haze, she saw it, a rickety, ancient-looking wooden bridge, probably built by prospectors decades ago. It spanned a narrow, 30-foot gap where the canyon floor fell away. "We cross," she urged. "No," Jonah said. He was off his horse in an instant. "He's letting us get to the bridge. His rifleman will be sighted on it. The second we're on it, we're dead. It's the killing floor." "Then what?" Jonah did not answer. He ran, not to the bridge, but to the near side of it. He grabbed one of the thick, rotted support timbers that anchored the bridge to the canyon trail. He put his shoulder to it. "Jonah, no!" He heaved. The man who worked iron and steel put every ounce of his blacksmith's strength into the motion. The wood groaned, splintered, resisted. A rifle cracked from the rim. The bullet struck the bridge, sending a puff of wooden splinters into the air, inches from his head. "Get down!" he roared at Rowena. He heaved again, a guttural yell torn from his throat. There was a sound like a giant's bone snapping. The main timber gave way. The anchor post tore free from the rock. The bridge, with a slow, agonizing groan, listed to one side, and then collapsed into the chasm. It did not fall far. The drop was only 20 or 30 feet, but it fell with a final, crashing finality. A cloud of dust and splintered planks. The shallow, muddy water at the bottom foamed and splashed. "He'll kill you!" Rowena shrieked. Jonah was already running back, grabbing his horse's reins. "Not today." He pointed not up, not back, but down, at the side of the trail, almost hidden by a tumble of scree and boulders. It was a dark, jagged crack in the canyon wall. A hole. "Javelina Cave," he yelled, slapping her horse on the rump. "Go, go!" Her horse scrambled, slipping on the loose rock, and plunged toward the hole. Jonah was right behind her. They half rode, half fell into the darkness, just as a volley of rifle fire erupted from the rims above, the bullets chewing the rock they had just vacated. They were in. The transition was absolute. From a world of blinding sun, red rock, and echoing gunfire, they fell into a cold, silent, and utterly black void. The horses, terrified, refused to go further, their hooves skittering on the cave floor. "Off, now!" Jonah's voice came, a disembodied, breathless command in the dark. Rowena slid from the saddle, her legs shaking so violently she almost collapsed. The lockbox, her anchor, felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. It was a thick, damp, living silence, broken only by the sound of their own breathing. And her heart. She clutched the box to her chest, and she could hear it, feel it, a frantic, trapped bird rhythm, thump, thump, thump against the cold, unyielding metal. It was too loud. It was a beacon. She was sure the men outside could hear it. She squeezed her eyes shut, as if that would help, and sank against the wall of the cave. The rock was cold, damp. She was breathing in the smell of age, of minerals, of animal, and of a deep, profound blackness. A hand touched her shoulder. She screamed, a short, strangled sound, and swung the lockbox. Easy, Jonah's voice, right next to her. His hand clamped down, not on her arm, but on her shoulder, a heavy, grounding weight. "It's me. Breathe, woman. Breathe slow." "They're coming," she whispered, her voice a ragged, broken thing. "Not this way. The horses won't fit. They'll have to come on foot. We have a few minutes." Minutes. We're trapped. This is a dead end. No, he said, his voice close. It's a passage, but it's not easy. Trust me this one time. His hand was a solid, warm presence in the absolute, terrifying dark. It was not a caress. It was a statement. I am here. You are not alone. She nodded, a useless gesture in the black. Yes, she breathed. Good. Give me the box. No. The word was out of her before she could think. A pause. We can't both carry it. The passage is narrow. I'm faster. Give it to me. I can't. She heard him sigh, a sound of profound exasperation. Then strap it to your back. Use your belt. Now. We have to crawl. He did not wait for her. She heard the scrape of his body on the rock, a grunt, and then the sound of him moving ahead. Fumbling, her fingers numb and clumsy, Rowena unhooked her belt, looped it through the box handle, and somehow managed to secure it to her back, the heavy, iron-bound corners digging into her spine. She got on her hands and knees. The floor was not smooth. It was a bed of sharp, pebbly rock and the cold, slick droppings of bats or birds. She gagged, but forced herself forward, crawling into the blackness toward the sound of Jonah's labored breathing. The passage immediately narrowed. It was no longer a cave. It was a crevice, a crack in the mountain's bones. She was on her belly, pushing with her toes, pulling with her elbows. The lockbox on her back snagged on a low-hanging piece of rock, jamming her, a spike of pure, claustrophobic panic seizing her throat. I'm stuck, she gasped, her voice a muffled sob against the stone. Turn to your side, Jonah's voice echoed back, hollow and close, and keep quiet. She twisted, the rock scraping her hip, the sharp corner of the box digging into her ribs. She felt her blouse tear, a long, ripping sound, and then the cold, abrasive kiss of the rock on her bare skin. She cried out, a small sound, as the skin on her shoulder and back was scraped raw. The smell was overwhelming now, her own sweat, a sharp, fearful odor, and the dry, ancient dust that tasted of millennia. And something else, the breathing. She could hear breathing, not just Jonah's grunts ahead of her, but something else, a heavy, rasping sound behind her. Jonah! She hissed, tears of terror and pain welling. They're in here, I can hear them. That's your own blood in your ears, he shot back, and my breathing echoing. Now move, we're almost… His voice stopped. He stopped moving. The sudden, absolute halt was more terrifying than the chase. Jonah, she whispered, her body frozen in the tight, dark passage. Don't move, he said. His voice was a different thing now. It was not hurried, not angry. It was absolutely, perfectly, lethally calm. Do not move an inch. What is it? It's a lodger, he said, his voice flat. And then she heard it. Not breathing, not a footfall. The sound was dry, like seeds in a dead gourd, a ch-ch-ch-ch. It was coming from the darkness just in front of Jonah. It was loud. It was close, a rattlesnake, trapped with them in the pitch-black, coffin-tight passage. Rowena's mind simply broke. This was it. This was the end, a stupid, meaningless, dark end. She was going to be bitten by a snake and die in a hole in the ground, all for a box of paper. She heard a small, metallic click, a scrape of iron on stone. And then, from Jonah, a low, steady sound. It was not a word. It was a hum, a deep, vibrating, monotone sound from his chest. The rattling continued, a furious, panicked, dry screaming. When I move, you crawl, Jonah said, his voice perfectly even, overlaying the hum. Do not wait, do not think, just crawl for the light. What are you doing? I brought a tool. There was a sudden, violent thud of metal on something, a horrifying, wet, coiling thrash, an explosion of rattling. And then Jonah's voice. A roar. Now! A pinprick of light appeared ahead. He had moved. He was out. She scrambled forward, pushing past the horror, past the thrashing, unseen thing, the rocks scraping her, the box on her back almost pinning her. She fell, tumbled, scraped her way out of the crevice and into light. She collapsed onto a bed of hot gravel, gasping, blinded, her lungs on fire. She had fallen into a small, bowl-shaped valley, a depression hidden in the mountains, filled with the spiky, alien shapes of yucca plants. Jonah was already on his feet, scanning the ridge above the hole they had just exited. He was holding a long, thin piece of iron, a foot-long hook with a sharpened point, pinned on the end, its back broken, its fangs dripping, was the snake. He calmly unhooked it with his boot and flung it into the rocks. They were alone. The pursuit was gone. At least for now, they were safe. Rowena lay on her back, the sun a hot, painful weight on her eyelids, the lockbox a dead weight on her spine. She was shaking, a full-body, uncontrollable tremor. She started to laugh. It was not a laugh of humor. It was a dry, choking, horrifying sound, half sob, half scream, torn from her ragged throat. She pushed herself up on one elbow, her torn blouse falling away, her shoulder a raw, bloody scrape. She looked at Jonah, standing there like a statue of iron and dust, holding his hook. "You always carry an iron hook with you," she rasped, the laugh turning into a cough. Jonah Pike looked down at the tool, then at her. His gray eyes were impossible to read. "Only when I expect trouble," he said. He did not offer her a hand. He did not smile. He turned his gaze from her to the horizon. Rowena followed his look. The sky to the west, which had been a clear, bleached blue, was now a dark, sickening, purple-green. A wall of clouds was not just gathering, it was moving, a solid, tumbling mountain range of dust and fury, blotting out the sun. The immediate danger was past, but a new one, a bigger one, was bearing down. The sky itself was coming to swallow them. The wind howled, a high, thin scream of a world being torn apart. It was no longer a wind. It was a physical wall of grit and fury. The sun was gone, eaten by the bruised, purple-green maelstrom that had chased them from the yucca flats. Dust, not rain, was what fell a fine, suffocating silt that coated their tongues and stung their eyes. Jonah had driven them hard for the last mile, his voice a raw bark against the storm's roar. "The Armitage place, it's our only chance." Now, they were inside, or at least in what was left of it. The Armitage farm had been dead for a decade, a casualty of drought or perhaps Marquand's earlier ambitions. The house was a skeleton, its ribs picked clean by the wind, but the barn, built low and strong with thick, hand-hewn timbers, still stood. They stumbled in, hauling the spent, trembling horses, and slammed the heavy, groaning doors. The sound of the wind dropped from a scream to a deep, vibrating moan, the sound of a giant animal pacing just outside, sniffing at the cracks. The barn was a cavern of shadows, smelling of ancient, dry rot, the ghost of hay and the sharp, mineral tang of the dust forcing its way through the warped planks. A fine powder of red dirt rained down from the roof, visible in the few shafts of gray light. Rowena slid from her horse, her legs giving way. She landed on her knees, the lockbox, still strapped to her back, slamming her forward. She did not have the strength to get up. She just knelt in the dirt, shaking, her body a single, thrumming nerve of cold and terror. Jonah, ignoring his own exhaustion, was already at work. He pulled the saddles from the horses, his movements economical, and rubbed them down with a piece of old burlap he'd found, his voice a low, calming rumble to the terrified animals. "We need a fire," he said, his voice cutting through her paralysis. He did not look at her. "The cold is coming. This storm, it'll drop the night 10 degrees. She looked at her hands, They were caked in dirt, blood, and sweat. They were trembling so hard she could not make a fist. I can't. He finished with the horses, tethering them in a far stall. He walked back to her. He did not offer a hand. He did not coddle. He simply found a sheltered corner, formed a small ring of stones from the broken foundation, and shaved a pile of tinder from a dry, inner piece of a support beam. "You can," he said, not unkindly. "And you will." He handed her his flint and steel. She crawled to the fire ring. It was a simple task. She had done it 100 times on the trail, but her fingers were numb. Alien things. She struck the flint, a spark. It landed on the wood and died. She struck again. Another spark, failing in the damp. Cold air. The tremors in her hands were so bad she could barely hold the steel. She was failing. At this, at everything. A large shadow fell over her. Jonah knelt, his body shielding her from the drafts that snaked across the barn floor. He did not take the flint. He simply put his large, calloused hands over hers, steadying them. "Together," he grunted. His hands were not gentle. They were rough, scarred, and covered in soot and grime, but they were warm. A deep, forge-fed warmth that seemed to seep straight into her skin. He enclosed her small, cold hands in his, and, for a moment, they just held the flint and steel, unmoving. He was transferring his own steadiness to her. "Now," he said. He guided her hand. Strike, a spark, strike, another. He leaned in closer, his head down, watching the tinder. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. He blew a small, steady stream of air onto the pile, his breath, warm and tasting of dust and the faint, metallic tang of his own skin, puffed across her cheek. It was the most intimate gesture she had ever known. More intimate than a touch, more real than a word. It was the simple, animal act of sharing breath, of sharing warmth in a dying world. She stopped shaking. Strike. A strong, bright spark landed on the driest shaving. It caught a tiny, red ember. Jonah blew again, a long, careful breath. The ember flared, a small, tentative tongue of orange. He added more shavings. The tongue became a flame. The flame became a fire. Light, warmth, and hope bloomed in the dark, cold barn. Jonah sat back on his heels. The new, dancing light played across his face, carving it into hard planes and deep shadows, and it illuminated his wrist, resting on his knee. The scar, the V. In the firelight, it was no longer a pale, accidental mark. It was a brand, puckered and angry, the skin pulled tight, a mark of ownership, a mark of pain. Before she could think, before her meticulous, orderly mind could file a protest, Rowena reached out. Her fingers, still tingling with the warmth from his, grazed the scar. Just a feather-light, trembling touch. He flinched. It was not a large movement. It was a violent, inward recoiling, a tightening of every muscle in his arm. He did not pull away, but he went perfectly, terribly still. His gray eyes, catching the firelight, locked on her. "I know that mark," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. The sound of the wind outside was a distant moan. Judge Whitcomb. He had a file, Marrow Creek. He had a list of names, of victims. Jonah's face was a mask of iron. He stared into the fire, his jaw working. The silence in the barn stretched, broken only by the crackle of the flames and the howling gale outside. "He called it a list of victims," Jonah said, his voice a low, gravelly thing, dug up from a place of deep hurt. "I call it a list of failures." He held up his wrist, turning it in the light. Marrow Creek. I was there. I was one of the ones who tried to stop them. Not with paper, not with the law. He flexed his hand, the scar pulling. We had rifles. We had the right. We thought that would be enough. We thought we could hold the pass." He looked at her, and his eyes were not gray stone. They were hollowed out, burned out pits. It wasn't enough. Marquand didn't send soldiers. He sent Rook and his regulators. They didn't come to fight. They came to cleanse. He swallowed, the sound raw. They rode in under a truce flag, and they branded us like cattle. V for, well, they had a name for us. Vermin. They branded us, and they burned us out. I was the only one. I was the one who got away, the one who failed. He had not just lost land. He had lost his fight. He had lost his name. This V was not a memory. It was his identity. Rowena, the clerk who lived in a world of balanced ledgers and precise figures, felt her entire world shift. The numbers on her secret ledger, they were not just figures. They were this. They were this man's pain. They were the fire, the brand, the failure. The distance between them, the space of a wary man and a hunted woman, evaporated. It was no longer there. She did not think. She acted. She moved. The few inches that separated them, and gently, with a terrible, aching understanding, rested her forehead against his chest. She did not embrace him. She did not offer pity. She just leaned. She rested the weight of her fear, her exhaustion, and her sudden, overwhelming comprehension of his pain against him. His chest was a solid, living wall. He was tense, every muscle locked, as if expecting a blow. She could feel the rough weave of his shirt against her skin, the smell of coal smoke, sweat, and the clean, sharp scent of the pine he had shaved for the fire. And beneath her ear, beneath the layers of cloth and scarred muscle, she heard it. His heart. It was not a frantic, trapped bird panic like her own. It was a slow, heavy, powerful beat. Thump, thump, thump. A forge hammer. A steady, grounding, powerful rhythm in the midst of the chaos. It was the sound of survival. The sound of a life that had refused to be extinguished. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 3 months, she felt a single, uncoiling thread of safety. She felt his hand, the one with the brand, come up. It was hesitant, rough. It hovered over her hair, a blacksmith's hand, calloused and strong, not made for gentle things. It touched her head, his fingers splayed, a gesture of profound, awkward protection. He did not speak. He did not have to. She tilted her head back. Her hair, unpinned and wild, was a tangled mess of dust and straw. His face was inches from hers, the firelight catching the gray in his stubble, the deep lines of pain etched around his eyes. Their eyes locked. The first kiss was not a kiss at all. It was an accident of proximity, a question. Her lips brushed his, as light as the touch she had given his scar. It was the taste of dust, of salt, of the cold storm, and the warm fire. He did not move. He simply watched her, his eyes asking what this was. She gave him the answer. She leaned in, a fraction of an inch, and pressed her mouth to his. It was hesitant, at first a soft, trembling pressure, a world of pain, and ledgers, and running, and fear, all pressed into one small, desperate gesture. Then his hand, the one in her hair, moved, his fingers threaded, his palm cupping the back of her head, holding her, and he kissed her back. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not a refined kiss. It was a kiss of necessity, of two people who had been starved of safety, of warmth, of a single human connection in a world that was all iron and bullets. His mouth was firm, desperate, and she met him with her own pent-up, silent scream. Her hand, which had been resting on his arm, fisted, gripping the front of his shirt, twisting the fabric as if she were holding on for her life. His other arm came around her, pulling her from her knees, lifting her, seating her beside him, never breaking the kiss. He held her, his arm a steel band around her waist, as if he could forge them into a single being, safe from the storm. Their breathing, which had been ragged, now synchronized, a shared, desperate pulling of air, in time with the rhythmic lop, lop, lop of the dust-heavy rain that had begun to fall, striking the barn roof. He pulled back, just enough to breathe, his forehead resting against hers. They did not speak, they did not need to, they just breathed each other's air, in the small, warm, firelit circle they had carved out of the storm. They lay side by side, not on a bed, but on a thin, moth-eaten horse blanket he had spread over a pile of dry hay. They were not lovers, not in the way the world meant. They were survivors. They lay fully clothed, her head pillowed on his arm, her hand resting over his heart, feeling that steady, powerful beat. He held her, one arm draped over her, a protective, heavy, comforting weight. They just touched, a hand on an arm, a knee pressed against a hip, the brush of her hair against his neck. They spoke in whispers, not of the past, but of the fire, of the horses, of the sound of the rain. Small, real, present things. It was a profound, quiet, desperate intimacy, built on heartbeats and shared warmth, more real than any passion. After a long, long silence, after the fire had burned low and the barn was filled with the steady drumming of the storm, Rowena's fear returned. A small, cold whisper. "Jonah," she said, her voice small, muffled against his shirt. "This box, the judge, he said it was the proof. But your scar, it's not just proof. It's a key to all that old pain." She looked at the lockbox, sitting by the fire like a dark, squat idol. "If opening it just reopens all that, if all it does is bring back that pain, I think I'd rather—" A calloused finger, smelling of smoke, pressed gently against her lips, silencing her. He looked down. His eyes, in the dim, glowing embers, were soft for the first time. They were no longer gray stone. They were the color of the deep, warm embers themselves. "Don't," he said, his voice a low rumble, vibrating through her. "Don't say rather die. Not now. Not when you just spent the last 3 days learning how to live." She looked at him, at this man who was a stranger, this man who bore the brand of her quest. He was right. She had been running from death, but she had not been living. Not until the smithy, not until the canyon, not until this fire. A small, slow smile, a thing that felt alien to her, cracked the dust on her face. It was a real smile, pulling at muscles long dormant. She buried her face in his shoulder, her hair a tangled, wild mess, brushing his chin. For the first time since St. Louis, she felt she belonged somewhere. And outside, the wind, no longer a scream but a deep, driving, percussive force, hammered the barn doors. The storm raged, relentless, drenching the world. It sounded like the heavy, measured, marching bootsteps of a fate that had not yet given up the chase. The storm broke with the dawn, leaving the world scoured and clean. The air, washed free of dust, was cool and sharp, carrying the scent of wet sage and ozone. The sky was a pale, fragile blue. Inside the barn, the fire had died, leaving a pile of gray ash. The mood had shifted with the weather. The desperate, huddled intimacy of the night was gone, replaced by the cold, sharp clarity of the morning after. They were alive. They were together. But the problem of the lockbox remained, squatting in the dirt like a dark, heavy fact. Jonah was checking the horses, his movements stiff. Rowena, her back and shoulder a network of raw, fiery scrapes, was rebraiding her hair, her fingers clinical and precise, ignoring the pain. When she was done, she did not go to the box. She went to her saddlebags and retrieved a neatly folded, oilskin-wrapped packet. She spread it on the ground near the ashes, a surveyor's map, creased and worn. "He's not just grabbing land. Jonah," she said, her voice quiet. all business. The clerk had returned, but with a new, hard edge. He's not just clearing a path, he's stealing the water. Jonah came over, wiping his hands on his trousers. He crouched, his eyes scanning the map. Her finger, still stained with dirt, traced a line. It was not the main, proposed railroad route. It was a secondary, looping, unofficial line, drawn in faint pencil. "This is Marquand's real route," she said. "The one he's building, not the one he's filing. It's 10 miles south of the public charter. Why?" Jonah studied the topography. "The public route crosses the Red River Flats. It's muddy in spring, dry in summer. Hard to build. This southern route. It follows the limestone shelf. It's harder ground, faster to build on." "And," Rowena said, her finger tapping a series of small, inked X marks, "it's drier, too dry. Except," her finger connected the X's. 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the only 4 deep water wells in this entire 60-mile stretch. All private homesteads. All. She looked up at him. "All gone." Jonah finished, his voice flat. He recognized the names. The Miller place, the Hanson brothers, Armitage. He gestured at the ruined barn around them. "They were all pushed out. Drought. We heard. Bad luck." "It wasn't bad luck," Rowena said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "It was policy, and it was all legal, or it looks legal." She tapped the map. "Now, look at this." She traced the line further west. "It's headed straight for Copper Lantern Ridge." "Why?" "The copper," Jonah said. "The smelter." "No, not just the copper." Her finger tapped the town on the map. "He needs the law, to make it all look clean, to sign the foreclosure papers, the new deeds, the seizure notices. He needed a local official to certify his theft." The barn was silent, save for the drip of water from the eaves. "What's in the box?" "Rowena," Jonah asked, his voice low. "The proof," she said. Judge Whitcomb was a partner in the bank, but he was also a federal magistrate. He was investigating Marquand for 2 years. He collected affidavits. He found the original land titles Marquand claims he bought. And he found the receipts. Receipts. For the bribes, the slush fund, payments from the railroad's shadow account, disguised as surveying fees, paid directly to the men who cleared the land, and to the man who signed the paperwork. "Who?" Jonah asked, though his eyes, dark with memory, told him he already knew. "Cole Avery," Rowena said, the name dropping like a stone into the silence. "Sheriff Cole Avery. The box contains 3 bank drafts, signed by Marquand's own man in St. Louis, countersigned by Avery, and marked as filing fees. They're fakes, they're bribes, and they're the only thing tying Marquand directly to the land grab." Jonah looked at the box, his jaw tight. He stood up, walked over to it, and nudged it with his boot. "And Rook is here to get it, to protect Avery, to cut the last thread. It all makes sense." He looked at her, his eyes hard and practical. "Give me the hook, the one from the cave. I'll have that seal off in 10 seconds. We need to see what we're really holding. We need to know." "No?" Her voice was absolute. He turned. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no." She stood up, walking to stand between him and the box. She was small, scraped, and exhausted, but she was a pillar of iron. "You don't understand. Jonah, the contents are not the proof. The seal is the proof. The judge's seal. The unbroken, lead seal of a federal magistrate." She put her hand on the lid, her fingers tracing the JPW. "The second you break that, the second we break that, this stops being evidence and it starts being a box of stolen paper. Marquand's lawyers. You have no idea. They will paint me as a thief, a scorned woman, just as they did in St. Louis. They will say I forged these. They will say you forged them. The only thing that makes this matter is that it's an unbroken, sealed, legal document. It must be opened by a public official. by a witness. Avery's the law, Jonas said, a bitter edge to his voice. Who's left? Marta Quinn. Rowena said, in Sparrow's Bluff. The judge trusted her. He said she was the postmistress and the acting territorial prosecutor. He said she was the last honest one. That's where we have to go. Jonah held her gaze for a long moment. The blacksmith and the clerk. He saw the logic. It was a cold, hard, legal logic he did not like, but he could not break it. He nodded. Once. Sparrow's Bluff, then it's 2 days' ride, if we can get past Rook. They rode out an hour later. The world damp and bright. The horses rested. They avoided the main trails. Jonah leading them through dry arroyos and over high, rocky mesas, his eyes constantly scanning, reading the land. Late in the afternoon, as a fresh, cold drizzle began to fall, they found him, a boy, no older than 14, huddled under an oilskin sheet by the side of a swollen creek. His horse, a scrawny mule, was standing hip-shot, its left foreleg held off the ground, dead lame. A canvas bag, marked Territorial Dispatch, lay in the mud. The boy was shivering, his face blue with cold, but his eyes were sharp. He was a newsboy, a courier. Jonah did not slow, but Rowena pulled her horse up. Jonah, we can't! Jonah stopped, his face a mask of impatience. He'll slow us down. Rowena, we're being hunted. And we're not them, she shot back. She dismounted and walked to the boy, who watched her with wary, suspicious eyes. Your mule is lame. No thanks to you, ma'am. He shivered. Just leave me be. I'm fine. You're freezing, she said. She unstrapped her bedroll. Jonah, look at the mule, please. Jonah sighed, a sound of profound annoyance, but he swung down. He ran his hands over the mule's leg. It's a stone bruise. Bad one. He's not going anywhere for a week. He looked at the boy. You'll freeze, kid. I have to get these to Sparrow's Bluff. The boy chattered, his hand on the bag. It's the mail. Rowena's head snapped up. Sparrow's Bluff. You're going to Marta Quinn. The boy's eyes narrowed. Maybe. Who's asking? Rowena made a decision. She pulled a small, leather-bound pouch from her saddlebag. From it, she took a single, uncancelled postage stamp. It was a high-value stamp, deep blue, bearing the likeness of a federal building. She also pulled out a small piece of paper and a pencil. I need you to deliver a message, she said. This is for Marta Quinn's eyes only. I ain't taking no messages for... This is from Judge Whitcomb, Rowena said, her voice low and firm. The boy's eyes widened. I need you to give her this note. She scribbled, the asset is in motion. The seal is unbroken. I require a 48-hour audience. She folded it. And you give her this. She handed him the stamp. That's just a stamp, he said. She'll know what it means. Rowena said, it's a prosecutor's stamp. It was his, now. You're cold, and your mule is lame. She looked at Jonah. Jonah, understanding, unslung his own spare blanket. Give the kid the blanket. Rowena, we'll take the bag. What, the boy said. We're going to Sparrow's Bluff. Jonah said, we'll deliver your mail. You get yourself warm. Someone will be along. The boy looked from Jonah's hard face to Rowena's. You'll take the mail and my note. We swear it. Rowena said. She handed him her bedroll and a small bag of dried apples. Stay dry. The boy, clutching the blanket, nodded, his pride warring with his shivering. She'll get you a message back. If it's really you, she'll post a notice on the public board at the Warden Bridge crossing. That's the deal. For her special mail. Warden Bridge, Jonah said, his body going still. Thank you, son. You've helped us. Now stay out of sight. They rode, the mailbag strapped to Jonah's saddle. Warden Bridge, Jonah said, his voice a low growl. It's the only way across the Red Kestrel Gorge. It's a choke point, and he knows it. He knows Marta posts her messages there. He knows everything posts there. It's the only public board for 50 miles. They reached the gorge the next morning. The Warden Iron Bridge was a new, ugly scar on the land, a creation of Marquand's railroad. It was a narrow, skeletal structure of black iron, spanning a 200-foot drop. And they were waiting. Not on the bridge, on the far side. Two men, silhouetted against the morning sun, one broad and wearing a star, was Sheriff Cole Avery, the other lean, calm, and wearing a new duster, was Clay Rook. They were just sitting on their horses, blocking the exit. A perfect, legal trap. Jonah pulled their horses behind a rock outcropping. "They're not drawing on us," he hissed. "They don't have to." "They're just going to arrest me," Rowena whispered, the blood draining from her face. "Avery, he'll take the box, legally. He'll try." Jonah's eyes were not on the men. They were on the bridge, on the structure. He was a blacksmith. He knew iron. Rook is smart, but he's not a builder. Jonah's eyes scanned the near side of the bridge. "There, the main anchor pin. It's new. They set it wrong." He was talking to himself. "They didn't seat the tension bolt. It's just sitting there, holding the main plate." "Jonah, what are you—" "I'm going to break his trap." He grabbed his heavy hammer and the long iron hook from his saddle. "Create a diversion. When I yell, you ride. You ride fast. Don't wait for me. Get to that message board. Get the message. And ride. I'll meet you." "No, Jonah, I won't." "Yes, you will," he said, his hand grabbing her arm, his grip fierce. "The box, the seal. Remember, it's the only thing that matters. Now, do it." Before she could argue, he was gone, a shadow moving low and fast through the rocks, toward the base of the bridge. She watched, her heart in her throat. She saw him, a small figure, climbing the iron superstructure like a spider. He reached the main anchor plate. Avery and Rook, on the far side, were too far away to see him, their attention on the empty trailhead. Jonah put the hook into the gap and heaved. There was a high-pitched, screaming shriek of metal on metal. "Hey!" Avery's voice echoed across the gorge. "Who's there?" Jonah heaved again, with a bang like a cannon shot. The main anchor pin, the size of a man's arm, shot free. The entire bridge shuddered. "Now, Rowena!" he roared. Rowena kicked her horse, breaking cover, and galloped onto the bridge. "It's them!" Rook's voice, a rifle cracked. The bridge tilted. As she raced across, the entire structure groaned and sagged. The far side, where Rook and Avery were, dropping a full 3 feet, its connection broken. Rowena's horse screamed as it leaped the new 3-foot gap, landing hard on the far side. She raced past the message board, ripping a single, tacked-up piece of paper from it. Behind her, Rook and Avery were scrambling, their horses rearing, trapped on the collapsing, impassable structure. Jonah was nowhere to be seen. She rode for a mile, her heart a cold stone, before she collapsed by a creek, her breath sobbing, the note clutched in her hand. T-Hall, 48, Marta would meet her. She had made it, but Jonah was gone. She waited for an hour, 2. The sun was high, the silence terrible. Then, a sound. He walked out of the trees, covered in grime, bleeding from a cut on his head, but alive. He had dropped into the gorge, followed the river, and climbed out. She ran to him, but stopped, her hands clenching. You're alive," she breathed. "I'm hard to kill," he said, wiping blood from his eye. "You got it." She held up the note. 48 hours. She'll meet us." "Good," he said, "because we're going to need her." He was pointing, back at the bridge crossing, A new, official-looking notice had been nailed to a tree. He'd seen it on his way. Rowena walked back. Her legs led. It was a territorial warrant from the federal office in St. Louis, filed by Silas Marquand's attorneys, for the arrest of one Rowena Vale on charges of extortion, bank theft, and blackmail. 48 hours, Jonas said, his voice grim. The noose just got tighter. We're not just delivering evidence. We're running from an arrest. Sparrow's Bluff was not a town. It was a trading post that had survived its own usefulness, a cluster of buildings clinging to a rail spur that was mostly rust. The tea hall, as Marta's note had called it, was the only two-story structure, a gaunt, clapboard building that served as post office, land office, and temporary courthouse. It was just after 2 a.m. when they arrived, leading their horses, the sound of their boots muffled in the thick, muddy street, and the trap was already laid. The building was not dark. Every window on the first and second floor was ablaze with the bright, steady, unusual glow of oil lamps. It was not a welcoming beacon. It was an advertisement. It was a stage, lit for a performance. "They're not just waiting for us," Rowena whispered, her hand tightening on the strap of the lockbox, which she now wore slung across her chest. "They're expecting us, the whole town." Jonah pulled her into the deep shadow between the feed store and the assayer's office. His eyes scanned the lit windows. "No, not the whole town. Just them." He pointed. "One man, second floor, left window. He's watching the street. Rook, and there." 2 men stood in the shadows of the town hall's own porch, just outside the spill of the light. One was broad, his shape unmistakable. Cole Avery. The other was a stranger, thin and wearing a town suit, a lawyer. "The warrant," Jonah said, his voice a low growl. "They're not going to ambush us. They're going to serve us. They're making it public, legal." "So, what do we do?" Rowena asked, her heart sinking. The law, the very thing she was running to, was being turned against her. "You said you needed to get inside." Jonah said, "You said you needed to cross-reference their books." "Yes, the tax ledgers, the Marrow Creek Annex file. If I can match their false public entries to the bribe receipts in the box, I can prove Avery wasn't just negligent. I can prove he was a partner." "Then you're going in the back," Jonah said. "But they'll see us! The lights!" "They've lit the stage," Jonah said, a grim, cold smile touching his lips for an instant. They forgot about the men backstage. He was looking at a half-full bin of coal, left by the feed store for its pot-bellied stove. "They're blacksmiths here. They'll have it." "Have what?" He did not answer. He moved to the horses, unstrapped a small, empty leather pouch from his saddle, and went to the bin. He began to scoop, not coal, but the fine, thick black dust from the bottom of the bin, pouring it into the pouch until it was full. "When I move," he said, "you don't go to the light. You go to the records room. It'll be at the back, left side, away from the post office." "How do you know?" "Small towns are all the same. The money and the mail go at the front. The past, they hide at the back. Now, stay here." He slipped away, a shadow moving against other shadows. Rowena watched, her heart hammering so hard she felt it in her jaw. She saw him emerge, not from the alley, but from the main street, walking steadily, his hands empty, walking straight into the light of the porch. "Avery!" Jonah's voice boomed, sharp and clear in the night air. The figures on the porch stiffened. Cole Avery and the lawyer stepped out of the shadows. "That's far enough." "Pike," Avery's voice was nervous, high-pitched. "I have a legal warrant for the woman Rowena Vale. I know you have her." "Do you?" Jonah said, stopping 20 feet away, his hands at his sides, open. "I'm just here to see about the mail." "Don't play games," the lawyer snapped, stepping forward, holding a piece of paper. "By the authority of the United States Territorial Court, I am ordering..." From the second-story window, Clay Rook's voice, calm and bored, cut through. He's alone. Cole. She's not with him. She's in the alley. Avery, emboldened, drew his pistol. Pike, where is she? Tell us. Or by God, I'll... You'll what? Cole, Jonas said, taking one more step. You'll shoot an unarmed man in a lit street for asking about his mail. He's stalling, Rook's voice from above. He's... What's in his hand? Jonah had pulled the leather pouch from his belt. Just this. He did not throw it at them. He flung it, upward, underhanded. A powerful, spinning throw. The pouch sailed past Avery, past the lawyer, straight through the open doorway and into the main hall, where a large, bright, glass-chimneyed oil lamp sat on the central counter. The pouch hit the lamp. The chimney shattered. The pouch, loosed of its string, tore open. What happened next was not an explosion. It was a physical event. A cloud of fine, highly flammable coal dust hit the open, burning hot wick. Thwump! A roiling, instantaneous ball of orange-black fire erupted from the doorway. A solid, concussive force. It was not a blast that killed. It was one that stole. It stole the light, it stole the air, and it stole the plan. Every lamp in the building, even those on the second floor, was extinguished by the sudden, violent change in air pressure. The porch, the street, the second-story window, all were plunged into absolute, total, suffocating darkness. Avery screamed. The lawyer yelled. His voice cut short as he tripped. Now, Rowena! Jonah's voice roared in the dark, and with the roar came the crash of his body hitting the men on the porch. Rowena did not wait. She ran. She kept her head down, ran from the alley, and burst through the back door of the town hall, which was, as Jonah had predicted, unlocked. She was in... The world inside was black, smelling of kerosene, hot charred air, and fine, stinging dust. She could hear the fight from the front porch grunts, the heavy, wet thud of fists on bodies, the crash of a chair. She ignored it. Back, left. She felt her way along the wall, past the mail slots, her fingers tracing the wood. She found the doorway. It was a storage room, a closet. Wrong. She went further. She found another door. It was locked. No, she breathed, her hands frantically searching. She could hear running footsteps in the hall. Not Jonah's. A lighter, faster step. Clay Rook. He was off the porch. He was coming inside. She backed away from the locked door, her hand finding a heavy, iron-bound postal scale on a counter. She did not hesitate. She raised it and smashed the lock. The wood splintered. The door flew open. This was it, the records room. Moonlight, thin and gray, streamed in through a single, grimy window, illuminating rows of shelves, all burdened with heavy, leather-bound ledgers. She was in her element. She moved with a speed she did not know she possessed. She did not look for names. She looked for dates. 1887, 1888. She found the section. Property tax, land deeds, annexes. Marrow Creek Annex. It was not a book. It was a thin, moldering file, tied with a string. She ripped it open. Inside were the deeds, the foreclosure notices, the transfer of titles, and on each one, a signature Cole Avery, and beside it, the official, embossed, territorial seal of Copper Lantern Ridge. This was it, the key. The lockbox held the bribes. This file held the proof of the crime the bribes had paid for. The signature on this file would match the endorsement on the checks in her box. The seal on this file, when compared to the judge's, would prove. She heard a sound from the hall, a different sound. Jonah was there. He was fighting. She had to get out. In the hallway, the battle was not a gunfight. It was a close, brutal, animalistic struggle in the pitch black. Jonah had his shoulder in Cole Avery's chest, pinning the heavier man against the wall. Avery, you fool, he's a... The voice came from his left. Clay Rook. He did not come with a gun. He came with a knife. Jonah did not see it. He felt the air change. He ducked, a fraction of a second, as a blade sliced the space where his throat had been. He shoved Avery away, the sheriff crashing to the floor, and turned to face Rook in the dark. "So, the blacksmith wants to play," Rook's voice hissed, a shadow against other shadows. "I'm not playing," Jonah growled. Rook lunged. Jonah did not meet him. He stepped aside, letting the man's momentum carry him past, and brought his balled fist, a 20-pound hammer of bone and calloused skin, down on Rook's kidney. Rook grunted, a sound of pained surprise, and spun, his elbow catching Jonah in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. Jonah staggered back, gasping. This was not a brawler. Rook was fast. He was trained. Rook came in again, the knife a pale glimmer in the stray moonlight from the door. Jonah, in his own element of close quarters and hard force, did not block the knife. He blocked the wrist. He caught Rook's arm in midair, his blacksmith's grip a vise of iron. The sound of it was loud in the small space, a crack of bone, a sharp, wet sound of joints being torsioned past their limit. Rook screamed. It was not a roar. It was a high, thin, animal sound of pure, unadulterated pain. The knife clattered to the floor. Jonah hit him. Once. A heavy, solid, rising blow to the jaw that lifted Rook off his feet and sent him crashing backward into the wall. Rook slid down, unconscious, his arm bent at a terrible, unnatural angle. It was in that precise, sudden silence, as Jonah stood gasping, his lungs burning, his ribs on fire, that Rowena stepped out of the records room, the file clutched in her hand. She saw Jonah, a massive, breathing shadow. She saw the shape of Cole Avery, groaning and trying to get up. She saw the folded body of Clay Rook. "Jonah," she whispered. "Get the box," he gasped. "We're leaving." "Not so fast, gentlemen." The voice was not male. It was crisp, clear, and absolutely in command. It came from the front doorway, which was now silhouetted by the first, pale gray-blue light of dawn. A woman stood there. She was tall, in her 40s, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a man's duster, and she was not holding a rifle. She was holding a lit, new chimneyed lamp in one hand, and a sheaf of papers in the other. It was Marta Quinn. She raised the lamp. The light flooded the hall, illuminating the scene. Jonah, bloody and breathing hard. Avery, cowering. His pistol lost. Rook, unconscious. And Rowena, her blouse torn, her face grimed, but her eyes blazing with a cold, clear light as she clutched the file. Marta Quinn. Rowena said, "It was a statement." "Miss Vale," Marta replied, her eyes taking in the scene with a cold, appraising stare. "I see you received my message." She looked at Cole Avery, who was now trying to slide toward the back. "Sheriff Avery," Marta said, her voice dropping, sharp as a razor. "Stay where you are." She walked forward, her boots heavy on the wood floor, and she did not look at Jonah or Rook. She walked straight to the sheriff, who had frozen, his face a mask of waxy terror. "Cole," she said, her voice almost conversational, "you are hereby served." She did not hand him the paper. She slapped it hard against his chest, a subpoena. "My court," she said, "opens at sunrise. That gives you," she glanced at the graying windows, "about 10 minutes. I suggest you find your pistol and your dignity. You'll need one of them." She turned, her gaze finally landing on the unconscious form of Clay Rook. "This one is a problem for a different court." A sound came from outside. A horse, Rook's men. The ones from the bridge. They were not attacking. They were retrieving. One of them, seeing the light, seeing Marta Quinn, and seeing their boss's broken form, just stared. "Take your trash," Marta said to the man, her voice projecting. "And tell Silas Marquand that Sparrow's Bluff is now under federal injunction. The box is in my custody." She looked at Rowena. "Or it will be." The man in the doorway, terrified, just nodded. He and another man dragged Rook's body from the hall, leaving a dark smear. Marta Quinn watched them go. She turned to Jonah. "You did this?" she asked, nodding at Rook. Jonah just nodded, his chest heaving. Marta looked at him for a long, hard moment. "Red Kestrel Pass," she said. A strange, hard statement. "If this court does not understand the situation, they will be waiting. They always are." She was not just a prosecutor, she was a realist. She turned to Rowena, who was clutching the file and the lockbox. Jonah, still breathing hard, put a hand on his ribs. He was furious at Rook, at Avery, at the fact they had almost lost. Rowena put a hand on his arm. His muscles were bunched, hard as iron. "It's all right," she whispered, her voice shaking, but clear. "We don't have to win this in the dark." She looked at Marta Quinn, and then at the new, bright, impossibly clean light of the dawn. "We'll win this with the daylight." Outside, the sun cracked the horizon, a brilliant, bloody, horizontal line. It was not a salvation, it was a challenge, and the day had just begun. The court was not a court, it was a granary, and it still smelled of sweet, dry corn and the sharp, acidic tang of rodent droppings. The sun, just beginning to climb, did not illuminate. It intruded, sending thick, dusty, golden bars of light through the gaps in the plank walls, striping the crowd. And it was a crowd. Sparrow's Bluff and all the surrounding homesteads had turned out. Farmers in clean but frayed overalls, merchants from the feed store, a half-dozen women in their Sunday bonnets, all packed onto benches made of rough planks laid over grain sacks. They were not there for justice. They were there for the show. They were there to see the box from Missouri. At the front, on a raised platform once used for loading, sat Marta Quinn. Her bench was a simple plank table. Her gavel was a wooden carpenter's mallet. She wore the same duster from the night before, but her hair was repinned, and her eyes were clear, cold, and absolutely in command. Cole Avery sat on a bench to the side, his face a waxy, sweating gray, his sheriff's star looking ridiculously large on his chest. He was not guarded, but he was not free. Opposite him sat Blevins, the lawyer from the night before, his suit immaculate, his face a mask of bored, legal contempt. Jonah stood against the back wall, his arms crossed over his taped ribs, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on the door, watching. "This body is convened." Marta's voice cut through the murmuring, not loud, but with a flat, hard quality that stopped all sound. "This is a territorial inquiry into the actions of Sheriff Cole Avery and the business of the Marquand Railroad line in this district." She looked at Rowena, who sat in the front row, the lockbox at her feet. Miss Rowena Vale. Rowena stood. The only sound in the granary was the scrape of her boots on the gritty floor and the rustle of the crowd as they turned to stare. She walked to the table. She was still in her torn, dirty clothes, her shoulder bandaged beneath her shirt, but she walked with the straight-backed posture of a clerk approaching her ledger. She picked up the heavy box and placed it on the plank table with a solid, definitive thud. The crowd leaned in. This was it. "Miss Vale," Marta said, "you have presented this lockbox, claiming it contains evidence pertinent to this inquiry. I see a lead seal bearing the initials J.P.W. "Judge Pembroke Whitcomb," Rowena said, her voice clear in the silence. "And you are his designated courier." "I am." "Has this seal been broken? Has this box been opened or tampered with since you took possession of it in St. Louis, Missouri?" Rowena's hand, small and raw-knuckled, rested on the lid. The crowd saw it. It was trembling, a visible, undeniable tremor of fear and exhaustion. "It has not," Rowena said. Then she raised her head, and her eyes, which met Marta's, were not shaking at all. They were as steady and as hard as the iron it was bound with. Marta nodded. She produced a heavy pair of iron tin snips. "Then, by the authority vested in me as a prosecutor for this territory, I declare this seal broken." Snip. The sound was shockingly loud. A clean, metallic bite. The lead seal, severed, fell to the table. The murmuring in the crowd was a single, low, Marta did not open the lid. She slid the box toward Rowena. "You, Miss Vale, you will open it." Rowena's trembling hand fumbled with the latch. She lifted the heavy lid. The room was still. Marta, with a deliberate, theatrical care, pulled on a pair of clean white cotton gloves. She reached in and removed the contents, one by one, placing them on the table for all to see. "Item 1, she announced, a surveyor's map, showing a proposed alternate route for the Marquand Line, through the Marrow Creek Basin. Item 2, a bundle of bank drafts, receipts, for consulting fees. Item 3, a single brass key, tagged Records Room, W and Y, Bank. And item 4, she pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. She broke the wax. It was a letter, many pages, written in a fine, elegant hand. She read the first line. "I, Pembroke Whitcomb, being of sound mind and in failing spirit, do hereby confess my part in a conspiracy that I—" Objection. Blevins, the lawyer, shot to his feet. His voice was a sharp, sneering bark. "This is a circus. It is not a court. That is not evidence. That is a stolen box, presented by an accused extortionist." He jabbed a finger at Rowena. "There is a federal warrant for this woman's arrest. Everything in that box is fruit of a poisonous tree. It is the fantasy of a dead man and the property of a thief. It is inadmissible." The crowd, which had been with Rowena, now wavered. A warrant. A thief. The murmurs turned suspicious. Marta looked at Blevins, her face impassive. "Your objection, Mr. Blevins, is noted, and your presence here, as counsel for the railroad, is also noted." She turned. "Miss Vale, please take the stand." Rowena moved to a simple chair Marta indicated. "Miss Vale," Marta said. "Mr. Blevins is not entirely wrong. You are under warrant, but you are not on trial today. Today, you are a witness. You claim these documents prove a conspiracy. Mr. Blevins claims they are forgeries. As a bank clerk, convince me." This was her ground. Rowena took a deep breath. The shaking stopped. She was no longer a fugitive. She was an accountant. "I will need," she said, her voice crisp, "the Marrow Creek Annex file from the town records, the one I retrieved last night." Marta nodded. A clerk produced the file. Rowena stepped from the chair and, in a breach of all protocol, took over the table. She laid the bank receipts from the box in one neat row. She laid the foreclosure deeds from Avery's file in another. "Mr. Blevins claims I stole this box," she said, her voice projecting to the back of the granary. "The bank in St. Louis claims I am a jilted, hysterical woman who forged documents. Very well. Let us assume I am a forger." She picked up one of the bribe receipts. "Here is a bank draft from the box, paying $500 to a shell company. It is endorsed on the back by Sheriff Cole Avery, his signature." She then picked up a deed from the town file. "And here is the official town deed, seizing the Hanson brothers' land for non-payment of taxes, also signed by Sheriff Cole Avery, his signature." Blevins sighed, bored. "Congratulations, Miss Vale. You have proven that the sheriff signs documents. It is his job." "Indeed," Rowena said. "But a forger, A forger makes mistakes, and a forger, especially one in a hurry, a forger trying to imitate another man's handwriting, he often repeats his own. She pointed. Her small, dirt-stained finger was a weapon. "Look at the numbers," she said. The crowd pushed forward, men standing on benches to see. The bank draft, $500, and the deed, $100. The amounts are different, but the punctuation is identical. She looked at the crowd. When you write a dollar amount, you put a period. 500, period, 00. But not this man, our forger. She looked straight at Cole Avery, who had gone the color of spoiled milk. On every single document, the bribe receipts and the town deeds, he has used a comma. She held one up. $500 and 0 cents. A comma. Not a period. A small, simple bookkeeper's error. An error a man like Judge Whitcomb, or a trained clerk like myself, would never make. But it is the exact same error, repeated on all the documents. The ones stolen from Missouri, and the ones filed right here in this town hall. She looked at Blevins. "I am not a forger, Mr. Blevins, but I have found one, and he sits right there." All air left the room. It was done. The connection was made. It was brilliant. It was simple. It was undeniable. The farmers in the back, the men who had lost land, the men who had been bullied by Avery. They understood. They did not just murmur. They stood. A man in the back slammed his hand on a support beam. Bang! Another followed. Soon, the entire room was a thunder of boots and fists. Not a riot, but a judgment. Bang! 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 Marta Quinn let it go on for a full 10 seconds. Then she held up her hand. Silence. Her voice was as cold as the iron hook from the cave. "Sheriff Cole Avery, based on the testimony of this witness and the evidence presented, I am ordering you detained, in my custody, on suspicion of federal conspiracy, mail fraud, and, well, we'll find the rest later." You can't," Avery stammered, his eyes wide. Crash! The main granary doors, the big double-wide doors, burst open, torn from their runners. They did not fall. They were thrown aside. 3 men stood there, silhouetted against the bright morning. They were not law. They were not town. They were railroad men wearing new dusters, new guns, and matching badges that read Marquand Security. Their leader, a man with a face like a dried-out leather boot, stepped in. His eyes ignored Avery, ignored Marta. He looked at the table, at the box. "This inquiry is over," the man said, his voice a low, confident growl. "By order of the Union Pacific Railroad, all assets, maps, and documents pertaining to the Merrow Creek Annex are now being secured for route security." He and his men stepped forward. The crowd, so bold a moment before, melted back, terror replacing their anger. These were the men who burned farms. These were the men who branded. "Halt!" Marta's voice was sharp, but the man just smiled. "This is not your jurisdiction. Ma'am, this is a barn." His men fanned out, moving toward the table. Marta grabbed her wooden mallet and slammed it on the table. Bang! "This court is not adjourned. You are in contempt." The lead railroad man just chuckled. He put his hand on the butt of his pistol. "And you are in my way." He took another step, and Jonah moved. He had been at the back wall, a shadow. Now, he was a presence. He walked, not fast, not slow, his boots heavy on the plank floor. He did not go for his ribs. He did not go for a weapon. He simply planted himself. He stood between the railroad men and the table, between the guns and Rowena. He was not as big as them. He was not as armed, but he was as solid as a mountain. He uncrossed his arms and let them hang at his sides. He opened his hands. They were empty, scarred, calloused, a blacksmith's hands. "You'll have to move me," he said. His voice was not a threat. It was a simple statement of fact. The railroad man's eyes narrowed. The smile died. "That can be arranged. Blacksmith." His hand tightened on his gun. The room held its breath. This was it. The bullets. The end. "Marta, Marta." A new voice. A boy. The courier from the trail. He burst in through a small side door, waving a yellow piece of flimsy— It's from St. Louis!" he gasped, running past the armed men, his eyes only for Marta. "It's been clicking for 10 minutes straight. They said it was federal urgent." He slammed the telegraph message onto the table. The standoff froze. The railroad man's hand stayed on his gun. Jonah did not move. Marta, her face a mask, picked up the flimsy— Blevins, the lawyer, who had been enjoying the show, now smirked. "What is it now, Miss Quinn?" "A recall from the governor, a notice of your disbarment." Marta read the paper. Her face did not change, but her hand, the one holding the paper, crumpled the edge. She looked up, and her eyes were dead. "Judge Pembroke Whitcomb," she said, her voice a hollow, strange thing, "was found dead in his home in St. Louis this morning. Hanged. They are calling it a suicide." Rowena's knees buckled. "No." The word was a breath, a prayer. "No. No." All of it for nothing. He was dead. Blevins, the lawyer, actually smiled. A broad, relieved, victorious smile. "Well," he said, spreading his hands, "how tragic, but that settles it. A dead man's testimony is hearsay. His confession is an unsigned, unsworn scribble. It's meaningless." He looked at the railroad man. "This is all over." "No," Marta said. Her voice was so low, so filled with a sudden, cold, diamond-hard rage, that everyone looked at her. "No, Mr. Blevins," she said, her eyes boring into him. "It is not." She held up the telegraph flimsy. "Judge Whitcomb is dead. Yes, but—" She took a step toward Blevins, who for the first time looked afraid. His notarized, sworn, and witnessed deposition, 34 pages of it, detailing this entire conspiracy, from the bribes to the forgeries to the names of Mr. Avery and Mr. Blevins. Your name was filed with the United States Federal District Court in St. Louis yesterday. The color drained from Blevins's face. Marta turned, and her voice was a trumpet. "This is no longer a territorial matter. This is a federal investigation, that box, and every paper on this table is now Exhibit A. It is the property of the United States government." She looked straight at the lead railroad man. "And you are interfering with a federal proceeding. You and your men will step aside, or you will be the first men I charge with contempt of a federal judge." The railroad man, so confident, so brutal, was not afraid of a postmistress, but he was terrified of a federal judge. The name, the power, it was a different world. He looked at his men. He looked at Jonah, who still had not moved. He looked at Marta, who was a pillar of fire. He took his hand off his gun, and he stepped back. Marta looked at Rowena, who was crying, silent tears of grief and, impossibly, of victory. "The inquiry is concluded," Marta Quinn announced to the room. "This case is moved to Fort Belvoir Junction, where it will be met by the United States Marshals. This box is now the central evidence of a federal case." The court was not a court. It was a granary, and it still smelled of sweet, dry corn and the sharp, acidic tang of rodent droppings. The sun, just beginning to climb, did not illuminate. It intruded, sending thick, dusty, golden bars of light through the gaps in the plank walls, striping the crowd. and it was a crowd. Sparrow's Bluff and all the surrounding homesteads had turned out, farmers in clean but frayed overalls, merchants from the feed store, a half-dozen women in their Sunday bonnets, all packed onto benches made of rough planks laid over grain sacks. They were not there for justice. They were there for the show. They were there to see the box from Missouri. At the front, on a raised platform once used for loading, sat Marta Quinn. Her bench was a simple plank table. Her gavel was a wooden carpenter's mallet. She wore the same duster from the night before, but her hair was repinned, and her eyes were clear, cold, and absolutely in command. Cole Avery sat on a bench to the side, his face a waxy, sweating gray, his sheriff's star looking ridiculously large on his chest. He was not guarded, but he was not free. Opposite him sat Blevins, the lawyer from the night before, his suit immaculate, his face a mask of bored, legal contempt. Jonah stood against the back wall, his arms crossed over his taped ribs, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on the door, watching. "This body is convened." Marta's voice cut through the murmuring, not loud, but with a flat, hard quality that stopped all sound. "This is a territorial inquiry into the actions of Sheriff Cole Avery and the business of the Marquand Railroad line in this district." She looked at Rowena, who sat in the front row, the lockbox at her feet. Miss Rowena Vale. Rowena stood. The only sound in the granary was the scrape of her boots on the gritty floor and the rustle of the crowd as they turned to stare. She walked to the table. She was still in her torn, dirty clothes, her shoulder bandaged beneath her shirt, but she walked with the straight-backed posture of a clerk approaching her ledger. She picked up the heavy box and placed it on the plank table with a solid, definitive thud. The crowd leaned in. This was it. "Miss Vale," Marta said, "you have presented this lockbox, claiming it contains evidence pertinent to this inquiry. I see a lead seal bearing the initials J.P.W. "Judge Pembroke Whitcomb," Rowena said, her voice clear in the silence. "And you are his designated courier." "I am." "Has this seal been broken? Has this box been opened or tampered with since you took possession of it in St. Louis, Missouri?" Rowena's hand, small and raw-knuckled, rested on the lid. The crowd saw it. It was trembling, a visible, undeniable tremor of fear and exhaustion. "It has not," Rowena said. Then she raised her head, and her eyes, which met Marta's, were not shaking at all. They were as steady and as hard as the iron it was bound with. Marta nodded. She produced a heavy pair of iron tin snips. "Then, by the authority vested in me as a prosecutor for this territory, I declare this seal broken." Snip. The sound was shockingly loud, a clean, metallic bite. The lead seal, severed, fell to the table. The murmuring in the crowd was a single, low, "ah." Marta did not open the lid. She slid the box toward Rowena. "You, Miss Vale, you will open it." Rowena's trembling hand fumbled with the latch. She lifted the heavy lid. The room was still. Marta, with a deliberate, theatrical care, pulled on a pair of clean white cotton gloves. She reached in and removed the contents, one by one, placing them on the table for all to see. "Item 1, she announced, "a surveyor's map, showing a proposed alternate route for the Marquand line, through the Marrow Creek Basin. Item 2, a bundle of bank drafts, receipts, for consulting fees. Item 3, a single brass key, tagged Records Room, W and Y Bank. And item 4, she pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. She broke the wax. It was a letter, many pages, written in a fine, elegant hand. She read the first line. "I, Pembroke Whitcomb, being of sound mind and in failing spirit, do hereby confess my part in a conspiracy that I—" Objection. Blevins, the lawyer, shot to his feet. His voice was a sharp, sneering bark. "This is a circus. It is not a court. That is not evidence. That is a stolen box, presented by an accused extortionist." He jabbed a finger at Rowena. "There is a federal warrant for this woman's arrest. Everything in that box is fruit of a poisonous tree. It is the fantasy of a dead man and the property of a thief. It is inadmissible." The crowd, which had been with Rowena, now wavered. A warrant. A thief. The murmurs turned suspicious. Marta looked at Blevins, her face impassive. "Your objection, Mr. Blevins, is noted, and your presence here, as counsel for the railroad, is also noted." She turned. "Miss Vale, please take the stand." Rowena moved to a simple chair Marta indicated. "Miss Vale," Marta said, "Mr. Blevins is not entirely wrong. You are under warrant, but you are not on trial today. Today, you are a witness. You claim these documents prove a conspiracy. Mr. Blevins claims they are forgeries. As a bank clerk, convince me." This was her ground. Rowena took a deep breath. The shaking stopped. She was no longer a fugitive. She was an accountant. "I will need," she said, her voice crisp, "the Marrow Creek Annex file from the town records, the one I retrieved last night." Marta nodded. A clerk produced the file. Rowena stepped from the chair and, in a breach of all protocol, took over the table. She laid the bank receipts from the box in one neat row. She laid the foreclosure deeds from Avery's file in another. "Mr. Blevins claims I stole this box," she said, her voice projecting to the back of the granary. "The bank in St. Louis claims I am a jilted, hysterical woman who forged documents. Very well. Let us assume I am a forger." She picked up one of the bribe receipts. "Here is a bank draft from the box, paying $500 to a shell company. It is endorsed on the back by Sheriff Cole Avery. His signature." She then picked up a deed from the town file. "And here is the official town deed, seizing the Hanson brothers' land for non-payment of taxes, also signed by Sheriff Cole Avery. His signature." Blevins sighed, bored. "Congratulations, Miss Vale. You have proven that the sheriff signs documents. It is his job." "Indeed," Rowena said. "But a forger makes mistakes. And a forger, especially one in a hurry. A forger trying to imitate another man's handwriting. He often repeats his own." She pointed. Her small, dirt-stained finger was a weapon. "Look at the numbers," she said. The crowd pushed forward, men standing on benches to see. "The bank draft, $500, and the deed, $100. The amounts are different, but the punctuation is identical." She looked at the crowd. "When you write a dollar amount, you put a period. 500 period 00. But not this man. This man, our forger." She looked straight at Cole Avery, who had gone the color of spoiled milk. On every single document, the bribe receipts and the town deeds, he has used a comma. She held one up. $500 and 0 cents. A comma, not a period. A small, simple, bookkeeper's error. An error a man like Judge Whitcomb, or a trained clerk like myself, would never make, but it is the exact same error, repeated on all the documents, the ones stolen from Missouri, and the ones filed right here in this town hall. She looked at Blevins. "I am not a forger, Mr. Blevins, but I have found one, and he sits right there." All air left the room. It was done. The connection was made. It was brilliant. It was simple. It was undeniable. The farmers in the back, the men who had lost land, the men who had been bullied by Avery, they understood. They did not just murmur. They stood. A man in the back slammed his hand on a support beam. Bang! Another followed. Soon, the entire room was a thunder of boots and fists. Not a riot, but a judgment. Bang! 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 Marta Quinn let it go on for a full 10 seconds. Then she held up her hand. Silence. Her voice was as cold as the iron hook from the cave. Sheriff Cole Avery, based on the testimony of this witness and the evidence presented, I am ordering you detained, in my custody, on suspicion of federal conspiracy, mail fraud, and, well, we'll find the rest later. You can't, Avery stammered, his eyes wide. Crash! The main granary doors, the big double-wide doors, burst open, torn from their runners. They did not fall. They were thrown aside. 3 men stood there, silhouetted against the bright morning. They were not law. They were not town. They were railroad men, wearing new dusters, new guns, and matching badges that read Marquand Security. Their leader, a man with a face like a dried-out leather boot, stepped in. His eyes ignored Avery, ignored Marta. He looked at the table, at the box. This inquiry is over, the man said, his voice a low, confident growl. By order of the Union Pacific Railroad, all assets, maps, and documents pertaining to the Marrow Creek Annex are now being secured for route security. He and his men stepped forward. The crowd, so bold a moment before, melted back, terror replacing their anger. These were the men who burned farms. These were the men who branded. Halt! Marta's voice was sharp, but the man just smiled. This is not your jurisdiction, ma'am. This is a barn. His men fanned out, moving toward the table. Marta grabbed her wooden mallet and slammed it on the table. Bang! This court is not adjourned. You are in contempt. The lead railroad man just chuckled. He put his hand on the butt of his pistol. And you are in my way. He took another step, and Jonah moved. He had been at the back wall, a shadow. Now, he was a presence. He walked, not fast, not slow, his boots heavy on the plank floor. He did not go for his ribs. He did not go for a weapon. He simply planted himself. He stood between the railroad men and the table, between the guns and Rowena. He was not as big as them. He was not as armed, but he was as solid as a mountain. He uncrossed his arms and let them hang at his sides. He opened his hands. They were empty, scarred, calloused. A blacksmith's hands. You'll have to move me, he said. His voice was not a threat. It was a simple statement of fact. The railroad man's eyes narrowed. The smile died. That can be arranged. Blacksmith. His hand tightened on his gun. The room held its breath. This was it. The bullets. The end. Marta, Marta. A new voice. A boy. The courier from the trail. He burst in through a small side door, waving a yellow piece of flimsy. It's from St. Louis, he gasped, running past the armed men, his eyes only for Marta. It's been clicking for 10 minutes straight. They said it was federal urgent. He slammed the telegraph message onto the table. The standoff froze. The railroad man's hand stayed on his gun. Jonah did not move. Marta, her face a mask, picked up the flimsy. Blevins, the lawyer, who had been enjoying the show, now smirked. What is it now? Miss Quinn. A recall from the governor, a notice of your disbarment. Marta read the paper. Her face did not change, but her hand, the one holding the paper, crumpled the edge. She looked up, and her eyes were dead. Judge Pembroke Whitcomb, she said, her voice a hollow, strange thing, was found dead in his home in St. Louis this morning, hanged. They are calling it a suicide. Rowena's knees buckled. No. The word was a breath, a prayer. No, no. All of it. For nothing. He was dead. Blevins, the lawyer, actually smiled. A broad, relieved, victorious smile. Well, he said, spreading his hands. How tragic, but that settles it. A dead man's testimony is hearsay. His confession is an unsigned, unsworn scribble. It's meaningless. He looked at the railroad man. This is all over. No, Marta said. Her voice was so low, so filled with a sudden, cold, diamond-hard rage, that everyone looked at her. No, Mr. Blevins, she said, her eyes boring into him. It is not. She held up the telegraph flimsy. Judge Whitcomb is dead, yes, but. She took a step toward Blevins, who for the first time looked afraid. His notarized, sworn, and witnessed deposition, 34 pages of it, detailing this entire conspiracy, from the bribes to the forgeries to the names of Mr. Avery and Mr. Blevins. Your name was filed with the United States Federal District Court in St. Louis yesterday. The color drained from Blevins's face. Marta turned, and her voice was a trumpet. This is no longer a territorial matter. This is a federal investigation. That box and every paper on this table is now Exhibit A. It is the property of the United States government. She looked straight at the lead railroad man. And you are interfering with a federal proceeding. You and your men will step aside, or you will be the first men I charge with contempt of a federal judge. The railroad man, so confident, so brutal, was not afraid of a postmistress, but he was terrified of a federal judge. The name, the power, it was a different world. He looked at his men. He looked at Jonah, who still had not moved. He looked at Marta, who was a pillar of fire. He took his hand off his gun, and he stepped back. Marta looked at Rowena, who was crying, silent tears of grief and, impossibly, of victory. The inquiry is concluded. Marta Quinn announced to the room, this case is moved to Fort Belvoir Junction, where it will be met by the United States Marshals. This box is now the central evidence of a federal case. The Red Kestrel Pass was not a canyon. It was a scar, 200 feet deep, spanned by a spider's web of black iron, a railroad trestle bridge. And this was the heart of the web, the switch junction, where two sets of tracks merged into one. The wind did not howl here. It shrieked, a high, thin, metallic sound as it tore through the iron girders. Below, the river was a distant, gray-green ribbon. They were not on horseback. They were in a cage. Marta Quinn had requisitioned a single, heavy, iron-sided baggage car and a small, puffing yard engine to push them to the junction, where they would meet the federal train from Fort Belvoir. Rowena, Jonah, and Marta were inside the car with the lockbox. The box itself was chained to a floor ring, a small, dark, heavy anchor in the middle of the rattling, swaying car. Jonah stood by the open side door, not for the view, but for the air. He was watching their back trail, his face grim. Marta was at the front, by the small, grimy window that looked out past their engine. Rowena sat on a crate, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, her gaze fixed on the box. The engine's rhythm changed. The chuff, chuff, chuff became a series of short, panicked coughs, and then a long, tearing, metallic scream of brakes. S-C-R-E-E-E-E-C-H. The car slammed to a stop, throwing Rowena from her crate and onto the floor. Jonah caught himself on the doorframe, his body tensing. "What is it?" Marta yelled, peering through the window. There's a car on the line, an empty flat car. It's blocking the switch." Jonah was already looking out the side door, not at the flat car, at the cliffs above. "It's him," he said, his voice a low, flat growl. He was right. On a rocky promontory overlooking the switch, a figure stood, even at 100 yards. The silhouette was unmistakable. The lean, calm posture, the duster whipping in the wind. Clay Rook. His left arm was in a sling, But his right hand was free, and he was not alone. Lining the ridge on either side of him were a dozen men. Railroad security. The men from the granary. "It's a trap." Rowena scrambled to her feet, grabbing the chain that held the box, as if she could pull it to safety. A man on the tracks, one of Rook's men, ran forward from the blocking flat car. He was carrying a heavy, coiled logging chain. With a loud, ringing clang, he threw it, not at the engine, but at the wheels of their baggage car, expertly jamming the thick links into the brake rigging. He looped it, pulled it tight, and snapped a heavy padlock. They were uncoupled from the engine. They were anchored. They were trapped. Clay Rook's voice, amplified by the vast, iron-walled canyon, drifted down, calm, clear, and unhurried. "Good morning, Miss Quinn. A slight delay in your schedule." Marta threw open the side door, her face a mask of cold fury. "Rook, you are interfering with a federal proceeding. You are facing 20 years for this." Rook just chuckled, a dry, thin sound that the wind stole. "I don't think so. Ma'am, I think I am resolving a federal proceeding." He pointed, not at them, at the lockbox, visible inside the car. "My employer, Mr. Marquand, is a reasonable man. He does not want that box. He does not want your papers. He just wants what's in the box. To be returned. To the air. To the river. Open it. Miss Vale. Open it, and throw the contents into the canyon. Do that, and you all get to meet your train." Rowena, her face pale, her knuckles white, stepped into the doorway. She looked up at the man on the cliff, the man who had hunted her, the man who had helped kill her mentor. She tilted her chin back, her voice, small but clear as a bell, cutting through the wind. "I'd rather die." Rook's face did not change. He just nodded, as if she had confirmed an appointment. "I know," he said, and he raised his good right hand. It was not a signal to shoot, not yet. Jonah saw it. He knew this man. He knew this kind of fight. This was not a negotiation. It was a set piece. "Get down," he roared. He did not run for cover. He ran forward, past Marta, to the small, grimy tender attached to their engine. He grabbed the coal shovel, plunged it deep into the black pile, and came up with a full, heavy load of fine, black coal dust. "Rowena!" he yelled. A single shot cracked from the ridge. Not at them. It hit the iron roof of their car with a sound like a giant's hammer. Whang! It was the starting gun. Jonah spun, his blacksmith shoulders putting all his weight into the throw. He flung the entire shovel load of coal dust not at the men, but into the open doorway of the car. The air, which had been clear, exploded. A cloud of thick black, choking dust filled the car, blotting out the sun, blotting out everything. It was the blacksmith's forge blast, a perfect, blinding, suffocating screen. "Breathe low," Jonah coughed, grabbing Rowena's arm in the dark. "Don't move! Don't!" Thwack, thwack, thwack. A volley of gunfire erupted from the ridge, a dozen rifles opening at once, but they were not shooting at people. They were shooting at the black, choking cloud, trying to find targets. The bullets did not find flesh. They found the car. It was a deafening, terrifying symphony of violence. Bullets pinged and screamed off the iron walls, whined as they ricocheted inside the small space, and thudded into the thick oak floor, sending showers of splinters into the black, dusty air. Jonah did not wait. He shoved Rowena hard to the floor. "Crawl underneath!" He was not pointing at a bed. He was pointing at the car itself. He hauled her through the open door, into the rain of bullets, and shoved her into the gap between the car's undercarriage and the track bed. He was right behind her. They lay flat on their bellies, in the sharp, greasy gravel, their world reduced to a 6-inch space. They were hidden behind the car's heavy sandbox, a thick iron container for the brakes. The bullets stopped, The black cloud began to clear. "They're not in the car," Rook's voice, angry now. "They're under it. Flush them out, Avery. Get your cowardly hide down there and earn your pay." The gunfire started again, this time lower, aimed at the tracks, the wheels, the ground beneath the car. Zing! Whoop! Crack! Gravel exploded around them, stinging their faces. Sharp, hot pieces of metal screaming past, inches from their heads. Jonah put his body over Rowena's, his arms covering his head, a solid iron shield. Grunting as a ricochet slammed into the sandbox, the impact vibrating through his bones. It was in that moment of hell that Marta Quinn, who had been huddled by the door, saw her chance. The gunfire was all on the car. Rook was focused on Jonah and Rowena. The switch lever, was only 50 feet away, on the track. Marta did not run for cover. She ran for the switch. She burst from the car, a tall, frantic figure, her duster flying. "The switch!" Rook roared. Seeing her, "Stop her!" A rifle cracked. A bullet tore a hole in her duster, but she did not stop. She reached the heavy iron lever, grabbed it with both hands, and threw her entire body weight into it. KCHUNK. The heavy tracks shifted, the points sliding, locking into a new position. She had changed their path. The baggage car, chained to the tracks, was useless, but the engine, which was still free, was not. Rook's men, seeing her, ran toward her. The engine driver, seeing his chance, slammed his throttle. With a hiss of steam, the small engine, now uncoupled, shot forward, onto the main line, leaving the baggage car and the evidence behind. "No!" Rook screamed. He realized what she had done. She had saved the messenger. She had sent the engine, and the news of the attack, ahead to the federal marshals, who were just minutes down the line. But she had stranded the evidence. "The box!" Rook roared, his plan in ruins. "Forget the engine, get the box." He did not wait for his men. He slid, scrambled, and half fell down the rocky cliff, his bad arm swinging, his good hand drawing his pistol. He landed on the tracks and ran, a man possessed, straight for the open door of the baggage car. "Jonah, no!" Rowena screamed. Jonah was already moving. He rolled out from under the car, not to fight, but to defend. He met Rook just as the man lunged, not for him, but for the box. Rook, his face a mask of fury, tried to level his pistol, to end the blacksmith, but Jonah did not try to hit him. He was a scout. He was a trapper. He moved inside the gun, his arms, not fisted, but open. He caught Rook's gun hand at the wrist, his scarred left hand clamping on the elbow. It was the hold from the outpost, a joint lock, a pin. Jonah twisted. There was a sound, a wet, sickening pop. Rook screamed, a high, thin, animal sound, the same sound from the town hall. His fingers, locked in a spasm of agony, opened. The pistol clattered onto the iron floor of the car. But the fight was not over. Stop it, everybody. Just stop." It was Cole Avery. He had come down from the ridge, his face a mask of pure, abject terror. He was not looking at Rook or Jonah. He was looking at the group of men who were walking up the tracks. Railroad workers, the grading crew, their shift interrupted by the gunfire. A dozen of them, in dirty denim, their faces smudged, their hands holding pickaxes and shovels. They had come to see the fight. This is a federal matter," Avery squeaked, his voice cracking. He was terrified of being named, of being seen. He pulled his own pistol and, in a fit of pure, mindless panic, fired it. Bang! Not at Jonah, not at Rook, straight up, into the sky, a signal of chaos. "What's he doing?" one of the workers shouted. "That's Sheriff Avery," another yelled. "He's with them! He's with the railroad guns!" "That's the woman from the granary," a third one shouted, pointing at Rowena, who was scrambling to her feet. "The one who... he's trying to kill him." "That's our land they're talking about." Marrow Creek. "Give us back our land." The mob, which had been a crowd of observers, turned. They were not scared of Rook's men. They hated them. They surged forward, a wave of angry, frustrated working men. Avery, seeing the tide turn, seeing his name, his face, his final betrayal exposed, just dropped his gun. It wasn't me." It was in this moment, a perfect tableau of chaos, Jonah holding the screaming Rook in a lock, Marta by the switch, Avery surrendering to a mob of angry workers, Rowena, her hand on the box that the new sound came. It was not a rifle. It was not a scream. It was a whistle, a deep, loud, multi-toned, official train whistle. The engine Marta had sent was returning, but it was not alone. Behind it, on the main line, was a long, dark blue train, a U.S. Army train, with a car of blue uniformed cavalry, their rifles at the ready. Summoned by Marta's frantic telegraphs, the federal marshals were here. The standoff was broken. Rook's men, seeing the soldiers, seeing the rifles aimed down at them, dropped their own guns. It was over. A federal marshal, a man with a chest like a barrel and a long, gray mustache, stalked into the car. He looked at Jonah, who still had Rook pinned. He looked at Rook, whose face was white with pain. He just nodded. "Sir, you can... let him go now." He pulled a pair of heavy iron cuffs from his belt. Jonah, his breath coming in great, ragged gasps, looked at the marshal. He looked at Rook. And then, he let go. He shoved Rook, who collapsed, cradling his broken arm, onto the floor. Rowena did not move. She walked over to the lockbox. Her legs were shaking so hard she could barely stand. She put both hands on the lid, on the broken seal, and she leaned on it, her whole body, her whole life, resting on that one single, victorious object. The game was over. The battle was won. Fort Belvoir Junction was not a place for sentiment. It was a military depot, smelling of axle grease, creosote, and the sharp, clean scent of government-issued soap. The proceedings were fast, cold, and final. In a sterile room, a federal judge, whose face looked like it was carved from old parchment, brought his gavel down, thud. "The assets of Silas Marquand and the Marquand Railroad Line are hereby frozen," he read, his voice a monotone, "pending a full investigation into federal conspiracy, fraud, and the wrongful death of Judge Pembroke Whitcomb." Thud. "The land titles pertaining to the Marrow Creek Annex are hereby declared null and void. The land and all water rights are to be returned to the community of original, lawful homestead owners." It was over. Not with a bang, with the stroke of a pen. Outside, on the depot platform, Marta Quinn stood on a baggage cart and addressed the small crowd of farmers and workers who had traveled from Marrow Creek and Sparrow's Bluff, their faces stunned with a victory they did not yet trust. "They'll tell you justice was served today," Marta said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the steam of the engines. "Don't believe them. Justice is not a meal they serve you. It's a crop you plant, you water, you fight for, and you are never done fighting." She looked out at the hard, wind-burned faces. "We don't sell justice out here. We just try our damnedest to keep it." The crowd did not cheer. They just nodded. They understood, and they began the long journey home. 3 months later, the wind on the Osage Flats had lost its high, screaming edge. It was autumn. The air was cool, the sky a deep, bruised blue, and the burnt yellow grass had given way to fields of late-season oats, rolling in the breeze like a golden, sunlit ocean. The new blacksmith shop did not sit at the edge of town, hiding. It sat on the rise, on the old Armitage land, overlooking those golden fields. It was new, built of fresh-cut pine that smelled of resin and sunshine. The forge was lit, But the sound was different. It was not the angry, desperate clang of that first day. It was a steady, rhythmic, peaceful sound. The sound of work. The sound of a life being built. The sign, hanging from a new iron hook, was painted in clean, black letters. It did not just say Pike. It read, Pike and Vale Repairs and Evidence Sealing. Jonah was at the anvil, his sleeves rolled, his arms slick with sweat. He was not just a blacksmith. He was the county auditor, the man who now put the official, legal, unbreakable seal on every land deed and bank transfer that passed through Copper Lantern Ridge. He had become the one thing he'd thought he'd lost the guardian. Rowena stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. She was no longer a fugitive, her clothes no longer torn. She wore a simple blue calico dress, and her hair was pinned back, but loose strands, whipped by the wind, framed a face that had changed. The fear was gone. The hard, brittle edges had softened. She was no longer just a clerk. In her hand, she held a letter. It was on thick, expensive bond, bearing the seal of the United States Federal Court in St. Louis. She had been reading it all morning. "They want me," she said, her voice carrying over the ringing hammer. Jonah stopped, plunging a hot piece of iron into the slack tub. HSSSS. In the sudden quiet, he turned. "Want you." "The job," she said, tapping the letter. "The one Marta recommended, head auditor for the Federal Railroad Commission, to inspect and verify all ledgers west of the Mississippi. It's what the judge would have wanted." She looked at the letter, at the promise of a big office, a salary, a world of power and respect, a world of clean, orderly, important numbers. Jonah just watched her. He did not speak. He did not move. He just waited. He had learned, in the last 3 months, to trust her. She looked at the letter. Then she looked at the wide, golden, impossible sky. She looked at the new, clean town rising below. And she looked at him, his face smudged with soot, his eyes warm, his scarred hand resting on the anvil. A slow, sure smile touched her lips. "I'm going to need you to build a new desk," she said, "a bigger one, for the office." He did not smile, but something in his eyes did. "An office." "Pike and Vale," she said, walking toward him. "It's a long way to St. Louis. They can send their files here, to me. I'm staying. Jonah." She reached up, her hand, no longer trembling, touching the V on his wrist. "I'm staying." That night, they held the opening. The whole town came. The granary, which had been a courtroom, was now a dance hall, lit by a dozen new, bright, shining copper lanterns that Jonah had forged himself. A lone fiddler played a fast, sweet reel, and in the center of the floor, they danced. Rowena was in his arms, her head resting on his chest, her hand in his. He was not a graceful man. He was a blacksmith, but he was solid. He was her anchor. She felt his hand, heavy and warm, on the small of her back. Holding her, she felt the steady, peaceful beat of his heart under her ear. The music slowed to a waltz. The crowd, sensing the moment, pulled back, leaving them in the center of the floor, in a warm, golden pool of lantern light. He stopped dancing. He just held her. "Rowena," he whispered, his voice a rough thing. "I'm here, Jonah," she whispered back. He bent his head. His lips found hers. It was not the desperate, starved kiss of the barn. It was not the allied, defiant kiss of the depot. It was a long, slow, deep kiss of arrival. It was the kiss of a man who had come home, and a woman who had found one. It was warm, and it was sure, and it tasted of wood smoke and cider and the promise of 1,000 quiet, peaceful tomorrows. Her hand slid from his shoulder, her fingers tangling in his hair, his arm strong and sure, pulled her closer. It was a promise. It was a vow. And it was, finally, peace. Later that night, back in the new house, the fire had burned low to embers. The lockbox, the one from Missouri, sat on the new pine mantel, its lid open and empty. It was not a weapon anymore. It was a symbol, a reminder. Rowena stood before it, her fingers tracing the J.P.W. on the lid. She was in her nightgown, her hair unpinned, brushing her shoulders. "It's finished," she said quietly. Jonah came up behind her, his arms sliding around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. He just held her, his warmth enveloping her, the faint, clean smell of soap and pine from his skin. She leaned back against his chest, her hand covering his. "He'd be proud," she whispered. "But Jonah, if there was another one, another box, another lie, and I knew what it would cost." She closed her eyes. "I knew it would take him. I knew it would lead to this." She turned in his arms to face him. Her eyes were shining in the firelight. "I would still choose to do what was right." He looked at her, at this woman, forged in a fire as hot as his own, who had taken all the pain, all the fear, and turned it into a spine of pure, unbending steel. He touched his forehead to hers, his own eyes, warm and full, reflecting the embers. "And I," he said, his voice a low, rough, final vow, "would still choose you." The wind that night, on the Osage Flats, was just a whisper. It did not howl. It did not scream. It just breathed. And on that breath, a new sound. The chuff, chuff, chuff of a train. The new, legal, safe line, running on the northern ridge. Its lights a bright, moving constellation. It sounded its whistle, a long, mournful, two-toned cry that echoed across the healed land. It sounded almost, in the quiet of the new era, like an apology. On the edge of town, where the wild, open prairie began, a single, new headstone stood. It was not in a graveyard. It was on a hill, overlooking the valley. Simple, clean, granite. It just said Judge Pembroke Whitcomb. He woke justice. Rowena stood there, the bright afternoon sun on her back. She placed a small bunch of wild, yellow daisies at its base. Her eyes were clear. "We did it," she whispered, a tear. One, final, cleansing tear, sliding down her cheek. "It's done." She felt a hand, large, warm, and scarred. "Take hers." Jonah stood beside her. He did not speak. He just held her hand. The sun was setting, painting Copper Lantern Ridge in a blaze of orange, and gold, and deep, peaceful purple. They turned, together. They walked, not back into the past, but toward the future. They walked, hand in hand, toward the new house on the hill, and stepped, together, over the threshold. The box was empty. Their freedom was not in iron, or in paper. It was in their hearts. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'm curious. Where in the world are you listening from? Please let me know in the comments so we can connect and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more folks.